Welcome back to the quiet apothecary. Take a slow breath, settle into where you are, and let the shoulders soften a little. There is no hurry tonight, and nothing here that asks anything of you. Tonight we are not staying inside the shop among the jars and the shelves. Tonight we follow one woman through one whole day, from the hour before the light comes up to the hour when the lamp is put out, and we watch her do the oldest and gentlest of all the apothecary's work, which is simply this: to walk out into the wild green world and bring a little of it home. She is a gatherer of herbs, and nothing more grand than that. She has no shop of her own, and no guild seal on her door. She keeps no manuscript of her own devising, though she can read a little, enough to follow the plain words of a borrowed herbal when the old physician up at the manor lends her one. What she keeps instead is a basket and a small curved knife with a worn wooden handle, and a memory that goes back to her own mother's hands, and further back than that, to hands she never knew, women and men who walked these same lanes long before her and left their knowing folded quietly into hers, the way a scent stays folded into a cloth long after the flower itself is gone. Let that thought settle for a moment. There is nothing urgent in it. It is only the shape of the day we are about to walk through together, slowly, hour by quiet hour, until the whole basket is full and the whole day is spent, and there is nothing left to do but rest. It is not yet light when she wakes. There is a particular quality to the dark at this hour, a soft grey thinning at the very edge of it, not yet dawn but no longer full night. The hour the old people of her village call the hour between the dog and the wolf, when a shape crossing a field could be either one, and you would not swear to which. She lies still for a moment in the low box, bed built into the wall, listening. The house is quiet around her, the banked coals in the hearth breathing faintly, a mouse somewhere behind the wattle wall going about its own small night business. Outside, very far off, a single bird has begun, one clear thread of sound in all that stillness. And it is that sound more than anything that tells her the day has truly begun to turn. She rises without hurry, because there is never any hurry in this work, only a steady following of the day as it opens. The floor is packed earth, cool and faintly damp under bare feet, swept clean the evening before with a hazel broom that leans now in the corner by the door. She dresses in the dark by feel more than by sight, a plain woolen kirtle the color of weak tea, an apron over it with a deep pocket sewn along the hem for small findings, a linen coif to keep her hair from catching on branches, and over all of it a rough cloak against the cold that always waits just outside the door at this hour. Even in the warm months, even now in the fullness of early summer, when the days themselves will grow hot enough by noon to make her glad of shade, she ties a strip of soft leather round each wrist, an old habit, a small guard against nettle and bramble, learned the hard way as a girl and never once forgotten since. The basket waits by the door where it always waits, a wide, shallow thing of woven willow, open at the top, light enough to carry all day and sturdy enough to hold whatever the day gives her. It is not new. The willow has darkened with years of handling to the color of strong tea, and one side bears a mended place where a split rod was bound back into the weave with waxed thread, her own work, done one long winter evening by the fire, when there was little else to do with cold hands. A basket like this is never simply bought and used. It is grown into, the way a good pair of shoes is grown into, until the shape of it and the shape of her arm against her hip have become, over years, almost the same shape. Beside the basket, hanging from a peg driven into the doorpost, is the knife. It is a small thing, no longer than her hand, the blade curved gently inward near the tip in the old way that lets it slip beneath a stem and lift rather than tear. The handle a smooth piece of ash-worn pale and shining where her palm has closed around it 10,000 times before. It has no other purpose in the world but this. It does not cut bread. It does not skin a rabbit. It goes out with her in the morning and comes home with her at night, and spends its whole quiet existence in the single steady work of taking, gently, only what is needed, and no more. Let this be one of the first things you carry with you into this night, this small quiet lesson folded into a small quiet tool, that the gentlest hand is very often the surest one, and that taking only a little carefully is itself a kind of skill, learned slowly over years, the way anything worth learning is learned. She eats standing, because sitting to eat at this hour has never suited her. A heel of yesterday's bread and a scrape of soft cheese, washed down with a cup of small, all poured from the jug on the shelf. Cool and faintly bitter, and entirely sufficient. There is a little more bread wrapped in a cloth and tucked into the bottom of the basket for later, under a folded square of linen that will, by the middle of the day, be holding something very different, root still dark with soil, or a soft heap of pale flowers, or a bundle of green leaves still cool with the morning's dew. For now the cloth holds only bread, and the basket is otherwise empty, waiting, the way the whole day is waiting, open and unhurried, and full of everything it has not yet become. She checks the sky before she checks anything else, a habit so old it is almost not a thought at all anymore, simply a turning of the face upward that happens the moment she steps through the low door into the cold outer air. The stars are still out, faint now and fading, but she can read what is left of them the way another woman might read a letter. A clear high sky with no ring around the setting moon, the wind out of the soft quarter rather than the hard one, a stillness in the air that speaks of a fair day to come rather than a wet one. This matters more than it might seem to matter. A gatherer does not simply decide, on any given morning, what she will bring home. The sky decides a good deal of it for her, and the wise gatherer has learned, over years of getting it wrong when she was young, to listen to what the sky is telling her before she ever lifts the latch of the garden gate. There is an old saying in her village, passed down from grandmother to granddaughter the way most of this knowledge is passed, never written, only spoken over and over at just the moment it is needed, so that it settles into the body rather than the mind. Gather in the dry, and dry what you gather. It sounds almost too simple to be worth saying, and yet whole years of good herbs have been lost to gatherers who forgot it, who filled their baskets in a fine soft rain, because the rain was gentle and the walking was pleasant, only to find, days later, up in the drying loft, a basket of leaves gone black and slick with rot instead of pale and papery with the good dry crumble that means the goodness inside has been kept rather than lost. So she checks the sky, and the sky today is kind, dry and mild and settling toward a clear, warm morning, and she steps out through the low door and pulls it closed behind her, softly, so as not to wake the rest of the small sleeping house, and the day, at last, properly begins. Before she leaves the doorstep, she does one more small thing, a habit so worn into the shape of her mornings that she barely notices herself doing it any longer. She reaches into the deep pocket sewn along the hem of her apron and checks, by touch alone in the still dim light, for the few small tools that always travel there beside the bread, a folded scrap of soft cloth for wrapping anything too delicate to simply drop loose into the basket, a short length of plain twine wound around a smooth stick, and a small wooden trowel, its handle worn as pale and smooth as the knife's, for the roots that cannot be taken by cutting alone. Each of these small things has its own particular place in the pocket, always the same place, so that her hand, reaching in without looking, in the middle of some careful piece of work out among the hedges, finds exactly what it needs without ever once having to stop and search. There is a quiet comfort in that kind of ordered readiness, she has always thought. The same comfort a carpenter must feel reaching for a familiar tool on a well-kept bench, or a cook reaching for a well-known knife in a kitchen arranged just so. A gatherer's whole trade depends on this kind of small, steady order, carried quietly from one ordinary morning into the next, so that the mind is left free to attend to the wood and the weather and the plants themselves, rather than to the scattered business of simply finding what she needs. The garden she keeps close to the house is small, a few beds edged with stones gathered from the fields, holding the plants she uses most and cannot easily find wild in the quantities she needs. Sage and rue and a stand of tall fennel gone, slightly wild at the back fence, a low mat of thyme that has spread, over the years, further than she ever meant it to, until it has swallowed half a path and softened the whole corner of the garden into a low green cushion that smells, when the sun first touches it, of something almost like warm honey. She does not stop here this morning. This close garden is for later in the day, or for other days entirely, the tame plants that wait patiently at home for her attention. This morning she is walking further out, past the garden gate, along the low stone wall, down the narrow worn path between two fields still silver with dew, toward the wilder ground beyond. The hedgerow and the wood and the meadow, and the wet low ground by the stream, where the plants she cannot grow, and would not want to, still keep their own old wild knowledge of when and how to be gathered. Let your own breath slow a little now, if it has not already begun to. There is nothing ahead of us tonight but a long, gentle, ordinary day, walked at a walking pace through green and quiet places, in the company of someone whose whole art is patience. If your eyes have already begun to feel heavy, that is no trouble at all. You need not follow every step to be carried along by the walking of it. Let the basket swing, let the dew soak the hem of the long skirt, let the last of the stars fade quietly overhead, and let us step together out onto the path, into the grey hour before the dawn, and begin. The path drops down from the fields and meets the hedgerow at its lowest point, where an old thorn tree leans out over a gap in the stones, and the whole tangled wall of green rises up on either side of her. Taller than her head, thick with 100 years of growing and cutting and growing again. A hedgerow like this one is never a single plant, and never a simple thing, though it is easy to walk past it 1,000 times and see only a green wall dividing one field from another. Look closer, she has always said, when anyone has walked with her long enough to ask, and a hedgerow becomes a whole village of different green neighbors, each keeping its own place, each with its own small gift, if only you are willing to slow down enough to see it. The hawthorn is first, and it is everywhere along this stretch, its white blossom already gone over from the height of its flowering weeks before. The small green haws only just beginning to swell where the flowers were, still hard and sour and months from ready. She does not gather hawthorn today. It is not its season. But she pauses all the same, a hand resting lightly on a low branch, because part of the day's work, she would tell you, is simply keeping track, walking the same paths again and again through the turning year, so that she always knows exactly where everything stands, what is finished, what is coming, what will be ready in a fortnight, and what will not be ready until the frost has touched it. A gatherer who only walks out when something is ready is a gatherer who is always a little bit lost. The knowing comes from walking the path when nothing at all seems to be happening, as much as from walking it on the days the basket fills quickly. Where the hawthorn thins for a stretch, the elder takes its place, and here she does stop properly, setting the basket down in the grass at the base of the tree and looking up into it with the particular attention she gives to very few other things. The elder flowers are at their very best just now, wide flat plates of tiny cream blossom held up on the outer branches where the sun reaches them first, each plate no bigger than the palm of her hand, and yet made up, if you looked closely enough to count, of more small flowers than anyone would have the patience to number. She reaches up with the small curved knife and takes only the fully open heads, leaving the ones still tightly budded to open in their own time over the coming days, and leaving too, on the far side of the tree where the shade keeps them, a good many heads untouched altogether, because the bees have their own claim on this tree, and because a tree stripped bare of every flower is a tree given no chance to become the dark heavy berries that will hang here in autumn, feeding the birds through the hard months and, later, feeding the household too, in a dark spiced cordial she will make when the season turns. This is a rule she has never once broken, not since she was a girl learning at her mother's elbow, and it is a rule so old and so widely kept among the gatherers of this country that it hardly needs saying aloud anymore, though the old women still say it over and over to every child who comes along behind them. Never the whole plant, never the whole tree, never even the whole branch if it can be helped. Leave enough for the bee, and enough for the bird, and enough for the plant itself to go on being a plant next year, and the year after that, and the year after that again. The wild hedgerow is not a garden she has planted and therefore owns outright. It belongs, if it belongs to anyone, to itself and to the whole slow web of creatures that depend on it, and she is only a guest here, however many years she has walked this same path, however well she knows every turn of it. A guest takes what is offered, gratefully, and no more. The elder flowers go into the basket loosely, laid on top of nothing, because they bruise if they are pressed, and lose half their sweetness if they are crushed before they are dry. She will use some fresh this very evening, dipped light in a thin batter, and fried gently to a pale gold, a small treat that has nothing to do with medicine at all, and everything to do with the simple pleasure of the season. The rest will go up to the drying loft to become, over the coming days, the pale papery flowers that fill a jar through the whole of the coming winter, ready to be steeped into a warm cup on the first night of a cold that is trying to settle into someone's chest, or a fever that needs coaxing gently down rather than fought. Further along, where a wet ditch runs beside the path, and the hedgerow thins into rougher, taller growth, the nettles stand thick and dark green. And here she takes more care with her hands than with anything else this morning. The leather at her wrists earns its keep here. She works with a light practiced touch, taking the young top leaves only, 4 or 6 to a stem, working with the grain of the leaf so the sting brushes away from her rather than into her, and even so, by the time she has taken what she wants, her fingers carry the faint prickling warmth that every gatherer of nettle carries home, at least once in every season, a small honest cost for a plant that gives so freely in return. Nettle is not a delicate herb, and it does not ask to be treated as one. It grows wherever it is left alone, thick and generous and entirely without vanity, and it has fed and strengthened more households through more thin springs than almost any other plant she gathers, worked into a simple green pottage, or dried for a tea that builds the blood back up after a hard winter or a difficult birth. It is, she often thinks, the most honest plant in the whole hedgerow, offering exactly what it is, with no sweetness to disguise the sting, and asking only a little care in return. There is a low hollow, at the foot of the bank a little further on, half hidden beneath the roots of an old blackthorn, and she slows as she passes it, though she does not stop, because she knows this particular hollow of old has watched a fox raise more than 1 litter of cubs in the sandy earth. Behind its narrow mouth across the years, she has walked this path. There is no sign of them this morning, only a faint musky trace on the air, and a scatter of soft down feathers caught in the grass at the entrance. But she smiles a little all the same, the small private smile of someone greeting a neighbor she does not expect to see, but is glad, all the same, to know is still there. A hedgerow, she has often thought, is never only a source of leaf and flower and berry. It is a whole close-packed neighborhood of its own, fox and vole and wren and beetle all sharing the same tangled green walls she comes to for her own quieter purposes, and she has learned, over the years, to walk it the way a careful guest walks through someone else's house, eyes open, feet light, taking only what she has come for and leaving every other small resident undisturbed in its own particular corner. A little further on, where the hedge bank rises higher than her head, and the thorn grows thick enough to shelter almost anything beneath it, she passes a place where the grass has been pressed flat into a shallow oval, still faintly warm when she rests the back of her hand against it, the unmistakable print of a deer that must have risen and slipped away only moments before she came round the bend. She does not see the animal itself, only its warm bed left behind in the grass, but she pauses there a moment all the same, the way she pauses at so many small signs along this path, reading the whole quiet, unseen life of the hedgerow from the traces it leaves behind for anyone patient enough to notice them. A bent stem here, a scatter of down there, a warm flattened patch of grass that tells its own small silent story of a creature that passed this way only a breath before her own arrival. Past the fox's hollow, the hedge thickens further with bramble not yet in flower, low white buds still tightly closed along canes. that will not open into bloom for another week or two yet. And she notes their position the same unhurried way she noted the hawthorn haws, filing it away against a return visit once the small white flowers have properly opened and the bees have had their own first turn at them. Beyond the bramble, threaded up through the thorn on the sunnier side of the path, the first dog rosebuds are just beginning to show a blush of pink at their tightly furled tips. Weeks still from the full open blooms, she will gather later this same afternoon along the boundary hedge on the far side of the village, and she pauses only long enough to register it. Another small quiet marker in the long unhurried calendar she carries, mostly without conscious effort, in the back of her mind through every week of the turning year. A wren scolds her sharply from somewhere deep in the thorn as she passes, sharp and disproportionately loud for so small a bird, and she laughs under her breath at it, the small, dry, private laugh of someone thoroughly used to being told off by creatures a tenth her size, defending nests and territories. She has no intention whatsoever of troubling. It is one of the small, unremarked pleasures of this particular stretch of the walk. She thinks, moving on past the indignant unseen bird, that so much of the hedgerow's daily business goes on entirely without reference to her, each small creature going about its own morning, exactly as it would if she were not walking past at all. And she has come over the years to find something quietly comforting in that, in being, for an hour or so of every working morning, simply one more unremarkable presence moving through a world that carries on, patiently and busily, whether she is there to notice it or not. By the time she has worked her way the length of this stretch of hedge, the sky above the field on her right has begun to change in earnest, the last grey thinning toward a pale gold at the very rim of the world, and the birds that were, an hour ago, a single thin thread of sound, have become a whole loose chorus, overlapping and answering each other from every hidden perch in the thick green wall beside her. She straightens, one hand at the small of her back, and looks back the way she has come, and then on ahead, to where the hedgerow bends away toward the deeper shade of the wood, and she allows herself, for just a moment, to simply stand still in it, the basket heavier now with elder and nettle, the dew soaking cool through the hem of her skirt, the whole hedgerow around her waking slowly into full green daylight. And there is nothing at all urgent in this moment, nothing to hurry toward, only the quiet steady pleasure of being exactly where the day has brought her, doing exactly the work her hands know best. If you have already let your own eyes close, there is nothing more for you to do now than let this slow green picture rest behind them. The white hawthorn gone to hard little haws, the wide cream plates of elder flower, the dark honest nettle, the whole hedgerow rising on either side of a narrow dew-soaked path, and the birds waking, one by one, into full chorus, while somewhere close by, unhurried, a woman with a basket moves gently on toward the wood. Before the path bends away into the wood, there is a low stile in the wall, worn smooth and shining where 100 years of hands and knees have crossed it, and she sits on it now for a moment, not because she is tired, this early in the day, but because this is the place where the light and the open field give way to shade and green enclosure, and it has always seemed to her a good place to pause and gather her thoughts before gathering anything else. It is here, more than almost anywhere on her walk, that she finds herself turning over the old signs, the quiet reckoning that tells a gatherer not simply where to look, but when. Much of what she knows was never written down anywhere at all, and never will be, and she has long since made her peace with that. It passed to her the way water passes from one cupped hand to another, mother to daughter, aunt to niece, an old woman at a well to a young one drawing water beside her, spoken once, perhaps twice, and then simply carried, quietly, for the rest of a life. But some of it did come from paper, or from the borrowed use of paper, and she thinks now, sitting on the worn stile in the strengthening light, of the one time the old physician up at the manor let her sit at his table for a whole long afternoon with his herbal open before her, a heavy-bound volume of careful drawings and small, close writing, copied out, he told her, by the patient hand of a monk in a distant abbey, working by a narrow window through a whole cold winter, so that the knowledge inside it might travel, page by careful page, far beyond the walls where it was first set down. She could not read every word of it, her letters being few and hard-won, but she remembers still the pictures most of all, a root drawn so carefully, it seemed almost to breathe on the page, a flower rendered in 3 small studies, bud and bloom and seed head, so that a gatherer 100 miles away and 100 years in the future might still know it on sight. And she remembers, too, one thing the physician told her that afternoon that she has carried with her every day since, that the great learned writers of this craft, going back further than anyone now living could properly count, had always agreed on this one point above all others, that the same plant gathered at the wrong hour, or in the wrong season, or under the wrong condition of the sky, might give only half its virtue, or none at all, while the same plant gathered rightly, at exactly its proper time, could work a kindness that seemed almost too great for so small and humble a thing. This is, she thinks, the whole quiet secret of her trade, if it can even be called a secret, since half the village could tell you the same things if you asked them plainly. The moon matters, not in some dark or fearful way, nothing that would trouble a priest, only in the plain practical way that a farmer minds the moon for planting, or a fisherman minds it for the tide. Roots, she has always been taught, give their strength most freely when the moon is waning, drawing down and in, the way sap itself is said to draw down into the root at that turn of the month. Leaves and flowers, by contrast, are at their fullest and freshest when the moon is waxing toward its full round face, rising up and out, the way the whole visible plant seems to lift and open toward the light in those nights. She does not claim to understand the why of it, only the pattern of it, tested and retested across more seasons than she can count, and handed to her as it was handed to the women before her, not as a belief to be argued over, but simply as a fact of the working year, no stranger, in the end, than the fact that bread rises better on some days than others, or that milk turns more readily in thunder. The hour of the day matters nearly as much as the turn of the month. This is why she is out before the sun has properly cleared the hills, and not lingering over her breakfast at home. The old teaching, and her own long experience besides, both agree that the finest hour for gathering the leafy, tender things, the elder flower, and the young nettle top, and, later in the season, the soft summer herbs of the meadow, is this very hour, the cool hour just after the dew has settled, and just before the climbing sun has begun to draw the moisture back out of every leaf and stem. Gather too early, while the plant is still half wrapped in the darkness of the night, and something in it, she believes, has not yet fully woken. Gather too late, once the sun has stood high and hot for an hour or more, and the same plant has already begun to spend its strength simply enduring the heat of the day. The way a person grows a little thinner and more tired by the middle of a long hot afternoon than they were at first light. The cool clear hour between the two, dew still silver on the grass, sun risen but not yet fierce, is when a leaf gives the very most of itself and asks the very least in return. She thinks, too, of the small careful ways the wise women of the parish have always marked the days of the week themselves, not only the turning of the moon or the arrival of a particular feast. Since certain plants, by the oldest teaching she knows, prefer to be gathered on one day rather than another, a preference tied less to the plant itself, she suspects, than to the old naming of the days, after the sun and moon and the wandering stars, each day carrying, in the minds of the women who taught her, a small flavor of its own namesake's particular virtue. She does not hold to this teaching quite as firmly as she holds to the moon and the hour, since she has tested it less thoroughly across her own years of gathering. But she keeps it lightly in mind all the same, one more thread woven into the whole patient fabric of when and how a plant is best approached, none of it demanding to be believed outright, all of it simply offered gently as one more piece of a knowledge built from centuries of careful watching rather than from any single certain proof. There are feast days too, old and half forgotten now by most of the village, but not by her. Days marked in the turning year less by any church bell than by what the land itself is doing on that particular morning. The eve of midsummer, when the sun stands at its very highest for the whole year, and the light lingers longest into the evening, is the day above all others for one particular yellow-flowered herb that she means to visit later in this very walk. A plant so bound up in the old people's minds with that one bright turning of the year that its virtue was always said to be strongest gathered on that single morning, cut with the dew still on it before the sun had properly claimed the day. She does not know, and has never much troubled herself to ask, whether the herb truly knows what day it is. She only knows that every gatherer she has ever learned from marked that morning on the calendar of her mind, the way a farmer marks the first frost, and that the habit, tested across so many years by so many careful hands, has never once given her cause to doubt it. None of this, she would tell you plainly if you asked, is a matter of magic, whatever a passing stranger might make of an old woman muttering about the moon over a hedgerow. It is patience, dressed in the clothes of habit, and habit, worn long enough, begins to look, to the outside eye, almost like a kind of quiet ceremony. She has come to love that quietness for its own sake, apart from anything it teaches her about the herbs. There is something steadying in a practice repeated exactly the same way, morning after morning, season after season, year after year, something that asks nothing of the world beyond a willingness to keep noticing it. Closely, the same corner of hedge, the same bend of stream, the same low stile worn smooth by generations of hands, until the noticing itself becomes a kind of rest, a kind of prayer without any particular words attached to it, said not in a church but out here, under the widening morning sky, with the dew still cool through the hem of a long skirt and a basket slowly filling at her side. There is a particular kind of person, she has noticed over the years, who cannot quite make their peace with a knowledge held this loosely, spread across so many separate memories, and so few settled pages, and who presses her, now and then, a passing traveller or a curious young clerk from the manor, to say plainly whether she truly believes the moon governs a route, or only finds it convenient to act as though it does. She has never quite known how to answer that question in the terms it is usually asked, since the asking seems to want a single word, believe or disbelieve, when what she actually carries is neither, only a long patient watching, tested and retested, that has simply never once given her good reason to set the old teaching aside. She has come to think, turning it over again now on the worn style, that this patient watching, more than any firm belief one way or the other, is itself the truest kind of knowledge a gatherer can hold, close akin to the careful habits of the miller, who minds his sails by the wind, than to anything a priest or a scholar might mean by the word belief. She rises from the stile now, the moment of stillness folded quietly away inside her the way the morning's gathering is folded into the basket, and climbs over into the deeper shade beyond, where the trees close in overhead, and the light turns from open gold to soft dappled green, and the wood, patient and old and full of its own quiet green knowledge, waits to be walked into. If you are drifting now, let this be the thought that carries you a little further down. There is no urgency anywhere in this whole practice, only a long patient watching, moon by moon and season by season, and a willingness to let the world teach its own slow lessons in its own slow time. Let your own breathing settle into that same unhurried rhythm now, in and out, and in again. The whole night ahead of you as open and unclaimed as the whole day ahead of her. The wood receives her the way it has received her every morning of her working life, with a change of light so complete that it feels, for the first few steps, almost like passing through a doorway into another season entirely. Out in the open fields the sun has begun in earnest to climb, but here under the close canopy of oak and ash and hazel, the light comes down soft and broken and green, filtered through so many overlapping leaves, that it seems to have been washed of all its heat, and left with only its gentleness, pooling in small bright coins on the leaf litter, drifting and shifting very slowly as the highest branches move in a wind she cannot feel down here at all. The air itself is different too, cooler and thicker, carrying the deep mineral smell of last year's leaves, breaking slowly down into soil, and beneath that, fainter, the green resinous smell of the wood itself, sap and bark and growing things, a smell she has never once managed to describe to anyone who has not stood exactly where she is standing now and drawn a slow breath of it in. The path narrows here to little more than a deer track, winding between the great grey trunks of trees old enough that three of her, arms linked, could not reach around the widest of them. She does not hurry, though there is more ground to cover in the wood than there was along the hedge, because hurrying in a wood like this one is, in her long experience, the surest way to miss almost everything worth finding. The wood does not announce its gifts the way a garden bed does, in neat rows, easily seen from a standing height. It hides them, tucked into the base of a rotting log, spread thin across the shaded floor, beneath a particular kind of tree, curled low and easy to overlook among the general green tangle of bramble and bracken that covers so much of the ground here. A gatherer who walks the wood at a field pace comes home with an empty basket and a story about how quiet it was. A gatherer who walks it slowly, eyes moving constantly across the ground a few paces ahead, comes home with her basket full and a dozen small discoveries besides. The first thing she stops for is the wood sorrel, a low, delicate plant she finds clustered thick around the base of an old fallen oak, its leaves folded in three like a clover, but softer, paler. A tender heart-shaped green that seems to glow faintly even in this dim light. She kneels beside it in the damp leaf litter, careless of her skirt, and gathers a modest handful, no more, because wood sorrel is a plant of small quantities, used a pinch at a time rather than by the fistful. Its bright, clean son is prized less for any grand cure than for the simple, gentle service it does a troubled stomach or a mouth gone dry and unpleasant during a long fever. She has always thought it a shy little plant, folding its leaves closed at the first touch of full sun or the first hint of rain, as though it would rather not be looked at too directly, and she handles it with something close to tenderness because of that shyness, laying it into the basket loosely wrapped in a leaf so it will not wilt before she can properly attend to it. Somewhere off to her left, deeper in among the darker trees, a woodpecker begins its short rattling drum against some hollow trunk, and she pauses to listen, tracking the sound without ever quite locating the bird itself. The whole wood, for a moment, gone still and attentive around that one small persistent knocking. It is a sound she has always associated, without any very good reason she could name, with the very deepest part of the wood's own morning, later and quieter than the dawn chorus of the open hedgerow, a sound that belongs entirely to this hushed green world of trunk and root and leaf litter, rather than to the brighter, louder world of open sky she left behind at the wood's edge. She waits until the drumming stops and the wood settles back into its ordinary rustling quiet, before she moves on. Further along, where a fallen giant of a tree has opened a wide gap in the canopy and let a shaft of proper sunlight down onto the forest floor, she finds the foxglove standing tall in its second year, the long spire of purple bells already half open along one side, the lower blooms further along than the upper, each one spotted deep within like a small painted throat. She does not touch it. This is one of the oldest and most carefully kept lessons of her whole trade, learned not gently but hard, passed down with a seriousness that no other plant in the wood quite receives, that some of the most beautiful growing things are also among the most dangerous, and that the line between a remedy and a poison in this particular flower is drawn so finely that only the most learned hands, working from long training and careful measure, dare cross it at all. She herself does not gather foxglove, has never once gathered it, and knows of no one in her own village bold enough to try. It grows here, tall and lovely, and entirely alone in its patch of borrowed sunlight, admired at a respectful distance and left, always exactly as it is found. Even the wood, she thinks, looking up at it a moment longer than she means to, keeps a few of its secrets for itself. She turns instead to the low soft moss that grows thick along the north side of every old trunk in this part of the wood, a deep green cushion so dense it seems to swallow the sound of her own footsteps when she kneels on it. This she does gather, a careful thin layer, lifted with the flat of her knife, rather than torn. Enough to line the bottom of a shallow basket at home, where new chicks will spend their first cold nights, or to pack gently around a wound before a proper binding goes over it, drawing out heat and holding a clean softness against broken skin better, in her long experience, than almost anything else the wood or the garden can offer. It asks nothing of her in return but a light hand, since moss torn roughly leaves a scar on the bark that can take years to heal over, if it heals at all, and she has seen enough careless gatherers leave pale torn wounds on trees that had stood patient and undisturbed for 100 years before that single thoughtless afternoon. There is birch further in, 3 slim pale trunks, standing close together at the edge of a small clearing, and from the youngest of the 3, she takes only a little of the thin outer bark. Working the knife carefully along a short strip, well above the height a passing deer might reach to browse, and only on the side of the trunk that faces away from the worst of the winter wind, so the tree's own healing will have the gentlest weather to work in. Birch bark steeped slow and long makes a bitter, cleansing drink that her mother swore by for the joints in a hard winter, and though she cannot say with any certainty why it helps, she has watched it help too many times, in too many aching knees and swollen knuckles among the older folk of the village, to doubt that it does. She takes what little she needs and no more, and rests her palm flat against the pale trunk for a moment before she moves on, a habit so old and so private that she has never once explained it to anyone, not even to herself in any words she could easily say aloud. She pauses once more, a little further on, where a fallen branch lies half sunk into a bed of last autumn's leaves, its underside gone soft and pale with the slow patient work of decay, and turns it gently with the toe of her boot to reveal a cluster of small orange jelly-like growths clinging to the rotten wood beneath, a fungus she knows by sight but has never once gathered, since her own knowledge of the wood's stranger, less plant-like growings, has always stopped well short of her knowledge of leaf and root and flower. She has heard it said that certain of the wood's fungi hold remedies every bit as strong as anything the meadow offers, and stranger poisons besides, but that knowledge belongs, in her own honest reckoning, to a different kind of gatherer entirely, one trained from childhood in a craft she herself has never properly learned, and she leaves the small orange cluster exactly as she found it, turning the branch gently back into place, content to let that particular corner of the wood's knowledge remain, for her, a pleasant, unsolved mystery, rather than a gap to be anxiously filled. The wood goes on like this for the better part of an hour, one small quiet discovery after another, a patch of wild garlic filling a whole shaded hollow with its sharp green scent long before she reaches it. A stand of fern whose young curled fronds she leaves entirely alone this late in the season, too far unfurled now to be worth the gathering. A scatter of small pale mushrooms she recognizes at a glance and passes without a second thought, since mushrooms are not her trade, and she has learned, over the years, exactly how much she does and does not know, and holds firmly to that line. By the time the trees begin to thin ahead of her, and a brighter, wetter green light announces the low ground beyond, her basket has grown pleasantly heavy, wood sorrel and birch bark, and a soft bundle of wild garlic leaf nestled in among the earlier elderflower and nettle, and the morning, though it does not yet feel old, has settled comfortably into itself, unhurried, generous, exactly as a morning like this one ought to be. Let the deep green hush of that wood settle over you, now if it has not already. The soft moss, the pale birch, the tall forbidden foxglove standing alone in its shaft of borrowed sun, all of it slow and quiet and entirely without urgency, and somewhere ahead through the thinning trees. The wet low ground of the marsh, waiting patiently, as it has waited every morning for longer than anyone now living could ever properly say. The wood ends the way it always ends here, not sharply, but by a slow softening, the trees growing further apart and shorter, the ground beneath them growing wetter with every dozen steps, until the last of the oaks give way to a scattering of alder and willow standing with their feet almost in standing water, and beyond them the marsh opens out, flat and green and gleaming under the now fully risen sun, criss-crossed by narrow channels of dark, slow-moving water and dotted with tussocks of reed and sedge that shift and lean under the lightest touch of wind. It is a different world entirely from the dry, rustling wood behind her, and she pauses at its edge, as she always pauses, to change the whole rhythm of her walking, because the marsh does not forgive a careless or hurried step the way the dry field and the hedgerow do. She knows this ground the way. She knows the inside of her own small house, every safe tussock, and every soft treacherous patch that looks, to an untrained eye, exactly like every other patch around it. There is a way through, a line of firmer footing, that only becomes visible once you have learned to read the particular color and texture of the marsh grass growing over it, a slightly paler green, a slightly coarser blade, and she follows that line now without needing to think about it, the way her feet have followed it every summer of her life, out onto ground that would swallow a careless stranger to the knee or worse, within a dozen steps of leaving the solid margin. The meadowsweet is the first great gift of this wet ground, and it announces itself before she even sees it. A warm, heavy sweetness carried on the still marsh air, honeyed and slightly almond-edged, drifting from a whole stand of it growing thick along one of the drier channel banks, tall creamy plumes of tiny flowers nodding above deeply cut dark green leaves. She works her way carefully out to it, testing each footfall before she trusts it with her full weight, and begins to cut, taking the flowering tops mostly, leaving the lower leaves and the roots undisturbed, so the whole stand will rise again next year, exactly as full as it stands today. A meadowsweet has long been one of her most trusted friends among all the plants she knows, steeped gentle into a tea that settles a troubled stomach and eases the low grinding ache that so often comes with a summer fever. And she has heard it said, though she cannot herself confirm it, that even the great physicians of the towns, with all their learning and their long Latin names, keep a jar of it close at hand for exactly the same humble purpose. Beyond the meadowsweet, where the ground rises just slightly into a low hummock still damp, but not standing wet, grows the valerian, tall and airy, its small pale pink flowers held in loose flat, topped clusters well above the surrounding sedge. It is not the flower she wants today, though the flower itself is pleasant enough, pale and faintly sweet, but the root, and the root means work of a different kind entirely than anything she has done yet this morning. She sets the basket down carefully on the firmest patch of ground She confined and kneels beside the plant, working her small trowel into the wet, dark soil around its base, loosening it slowly, patiently, easing the whole root system free rather than tearing it, because a torn root leaves half its strength behind in the ground and gives her, for all her effort, only a poor thin remedy instead of a full and generous one. The valerian root, once she has worked it free and shaken the worst of the clinging black mud from it, carries a smell that surprises every stranger who first meets it, and yet has become to her, over so many years of handling it, almost a comfort in itself, a deep, dark, earthy odor, not unpleasant exactly, though certainly strange, something between a damp cellar and an old worn shoe. And yet from this unlovely root comes one of the gentlest and most trusted of all the remedies she carries home, a slow calming draught for a mind too busy to let its body sleep, a quieting of the nerves that has settled more than one anxious household through more than one hard night. She wraps the wet root in its own separate cloth, apart from the drier gatherings already in the basket, because valerian root, more than almost anything else she carries, is a plant that likes to travel alone. Further out still, at the very edge of what she considers safe walking, a stand of yellow flag grows tall along the deepest of the channels, its bright sword-shaped leaves and vivid yellow blooms marking the true wet heart of the marsh, and here she stops rather than continues, because this particular plant, for all its beauty, is not one she gathers, its root sharing something of the same dangerous strength as the foxglove she left untouched back in the wood, useful only, she has always understood, in hands far more learned and far more careful than her own. She looks at it for a moment, the way she looked at the foxglove, with something between respect and caution, and then turns back toward the firmer ground, satisfied with what the marsh has already given her, and unwilling to press any further out onto uncertain footing for a plant she would not know how to use safely, even if she gathered it. Before she turns fully back toward the dry margin, she pauses a moment longer beside a low stand of watermint, growing where a small channel narrows almost to nothing, its square stems and toothed leaves releasing a bright, cool fragrance the instant her sleeve brushes against them, sharper and greener than the garden mint she keeps closer to home, and, to her mind, a good deal more honest for having earned its own living out here in the wet ground, rather than being coaxed along in a tended bed. She takes only a modest handful, crushing a leaf lightly between her fingers, first to be certain of it before she cuts, since more than one plant of the wet margins wears a passing resemblance to its safer neighbors, and a careful gatherer never trusts her eye alone when her nose can confirm what her eye suspects. Watermint steeped simply in hot water has settled more queasy stomachs in her own household than she could easily count, and dabbed cool against the temples, it has eased more than one long summer headache besides. And she tucks the small bundle in beside the meadowsweet with the quiet satisfaction of a gatherer who has found one gift more than the morning strictly owed her. The marsh birds are fully awake now, filling the whole, flat green expanse with a chorus entirely different from the hedgerows. Reed warblers chattering low and continuous from somewhere deep in the standing sedge, a moorhen picking its fastidious way along the margin of a channel with the particular jerking, deliberate walk that always makes her think privately of an old woman crossing a market square in her best shoes, mindful of every puddle. Somewhere further off, a snipe rises with its strange drumming call and vanishes again, just as quickly, and she straightens for a moment to watch the last of its flight before it disappears behind a stand of reed, letting the whole wide, wet, gently noisy world of the marsh settle over her for one unhurried breath before she gathers herself to move on. A heron stands motionless in one of the wider channels as she makes her careful way back toward dry ground, one long grey leg lifted and still, watching the dark water with the same unhurried patience she recognizes faintly in her own morning's work, and she pauses to watch it in turn for a long moment, neither of them moving, until some small unseen movement in the water below finally rewards the bird's long stillness, and it strikes, quick and sure, and the moment passes. She smiles a little at that, at the small shared lesson in it, that stillness and patience so often serve a purpose that no amount of hurried searching ever could. Whether the prize at the end of it is a fish or a root, or simply a full and honest morning's work, there is a particular quality to the quiet out here, in the flat, wide open heart of the marsh, that she has never quite found anywhere else on her whole long round. Neither the close green hush of the wood, nor the wide bright hum of the meadow, something to do, she has always supposed, with the sheer flatness of the ground, and the great open bowl of sky it leaves standing overhead, uninterrupted by any tree or hedge or rising hill. Sound seems to travel differently here, carrying further and clearer across the still water than it would through denser growth, so that the smallest rustle of a reed warbler or the faintest splash of a moorhen slipping into a channel reaches her ears with a kind of sharp, clean immediacy that the wood, muffled everywhere by leaf and branch, never quite manages. She has come to think of the marsh over the years as the most honest piece of ground on her whole round, offering up its sounds and its sights with nothing at all to soften or disguise them, and asking, in return, only the same plain honesty from anyone careful enough to walk it well. By the time she has picked her way back to the solid margin of the wood, the sun has climbed well clear of the treetops behind her, and the whole marsh has begun to shimmer faintly with the first real heat of the day, insects rising in soft clouds over the standing water, the heavy sweet smell of the meadowsweet still clinging to her hands and sleeves. The basket has grown heavier again, the wrapped valerian root settled at the bottom, the meadowsweet laid loosely across the top, and she allows herself, standing at the edge of the marsh with the wood at her back, and the whole bright morning ahead of her, a long slow breath of satisfaction, the particular contentment of a gatherer who has asked a difficult, unforgiving piece of ground for its gifts, and been answered generously. Let your own body rest as heavy, and as still now as that patient grey heron, one long unhurried breath after another, while the marsh light shimmers, somewhere far off behind your closing eyes, and the woman with the basket turns, unhurried, toward the open meadow and the climbing sun. The meadow, when she climbs up out of the marsh margin and over the last low stile onto its gently rising ground, feels almost like stepping into an entirely different and much brighter day. Here there is no dappled green shade, no cool wet hush, only wide open grass rolling gently away toward a distant line of trees. The sun now fully clear of the horizon and climbing steadily toward the top of its arc, warm on her shoulders through the wool of her dress in a way that feels after the cool of the wood and the marsh, almost like a small kindness. The grass itself stands nearly waist-high in places, silvered and heavy with seed, moving in long, slow waves whenever the wind crosses it. And scattered through all that green and gold like small bright coins are the flowers of high summer, more of them than she could ever gather in a single morning, more than she has any need to gather, since a meadow like this one offers far more than any single household could ever use. She moves slowly out into it, the basket riding easy on her hip, now that the morning's steepest and wettest work is behind her, and lets her eye range across the whole bright expanse before settling on any one thing, because the meadow, unlike the wood or the marsh, rewards a wide, unhurried looking more than a close, searching one. The chamomile is easiest to find, low mounding clumps of feathery leaf, topped with small white daisy flowers, their yellow centers rising slightly domed above the petals and the scent of it, when her skirt brushes against a clump in passing, rises up sweet and green and faintly apple, a smell so gentle and so immediately calming that she has sometimes thought the plant hardly needs to be steeped into anything at all. That simply walking through a meadow full of it might do half the work of a proper tea. She kneels to gather it properly all the same, taking the flower heads only, working steadily along one long drift of it that follows a slight fold in the ground where the grass grows a little shorter and the chamomile has claimed the space for itself. And as her hands work, she lets her mind wander a little, the way it always does in this particular open, bright stretch of the walk, back to every small use this one plant has ever served in her own household, and half the households of the village besides, a cup of it warm before bed for a mind too restless to settle, a cooled infusion dabbed gently onto a child's reddened eye, a few flowers added to a pot of ordinary water simply because the smell of it, filling a small dim room, has always seemed to her a kind of quiet blessing in itself, whether or not anyone drinking it could have said exactly why. Not far beyond the chamomile drift, where the ground rises just slightly toward a low grassy bank that catches the sun for the longest hours of any patch in the whole meadow, she finds the yarrow, its flat clustered heads of small white flowers held up on tough feathery stemmed leaves that feel, when she rubs one gently between her fingers, almost like a fine soft fern. Yarrow has always struck her as a plant of quiet, stubborn strength, growing where drier, harder soil turns away plants that demand an easier life, and she has come to trust it above almost anything else for a wound that will not stop its bleeding, the crushed leaf pressed directly against a cut closing it, in her long experience, faster and cleaner than almost any other single remedy the meadow or the garden can offer. She takes a generous handful, more than she took of the chamomile, because yarrow, once dried, keeps its virtue for a very long time in the jar, and a household never quite knows, from one season to the next, how much of it a bad harvest, a careless axe, or a difficult birth might eventually call for. Threaded through the grass all around both drifts grows the wild scabious, its soft lilac blue pincushion flowers held high on slender stems above the general green. Less useful to her trade than either the chamomile or the yarrow, but lovely enough that she gathers a small, loose bunch of it purely for the pleasure of the thing. To stand in a cracked jug on the windowsill of the small house and remind her, through the coming week, of exactly this bright morning, this exact meadow, this exact warm slant of climbing sun. Not every gathering, she has always believed, needs a strict and sober purpose. Some of it is simply for the eye, and for the small, quiet gladness that a bunch of flowers on a windowsill can bring to an otherwise plain and working household. And she has never once felt the need to apologize to herself for that. The bees are everywhere across this whole stretch of meadow, moving in slow, drowsy circuits from clump to clump, and she has long since learned to move among them without the slightest concern, since a bee intent on its own honest work has no quarrel whatsoever with a woman intent on hers. And the two of them, gatherer and bee, have worked this same meadow side by side for so many mornings across so many years that she has come, in an odd, quiet way, to think of them almost as fellow laborers, each taking only what is needed, each leaving the greater part of the flower's bounty for whoever comes after. Somewhere off toward the far tree line, a cuckoo calls twice, its two flat notes carrying easily across the whole open ground, and closer at hand a lark rises almost straight up out of the grass a few yards ahead of her, climbing and singing in the same breath until it is little more than a small dark speck against the pale climbing blue, its thin bright song still pouring down long after she has lost sight of the bird itself. Further along the sunny bank, past the yarrow and the scabious, she comes upon a low patch of wild pansy, its small purple and yellow faces turned up toward the sun among the shorter grass, and she gathers a modest pinch of it more from habit than from any pressing need, since it has never been one of her most called upon remedies, but has served, more than once, to soothe a child's rough patch of skin gone red and itching from a summer spent too long in nettles and brambles, steeped gentle into a wash that cools as much by its coolness as by anything else it carries. Close beside it, almost hidden in the general tangle of grass, grows the self-heal, its small blue-purple flower spikes so modest and so easily overlooked that she has met more than one younger gatherer walk straight past it without a second glance, and yet it has earned its plain, sturdy name honestly enough over the long years of her own trade, closing small cuts and easing sore throats with a quiet reliability that asks no great attention in return for a great deal of steady service. A little further along the same sunny bank, she comes across a low tangle of wild strawberry, its small white flowers mostly finished now and given way to the first tiny green berries, hard and sour still, weeks away from the soft red sweetness they will offer later in the season, and she smiles at the sight of them, remembering, as she always remembers at this particular spot, long summer afternoons spent here as a girl herself, hands and mouth both stained faintly red, gathering as much for the simple sweet pleasure of eating as for any basket waiting to be filled. Not every plant along her round belongs strictly to the trade of gathering and drying and keeping. Some of it belongs, just as rightly, to the plain simple pleasure of being a person walking through a generous world on a fine warm morning, and she has never once felt the need to justify to herself the handful of berries she sometimes eats standing right there in the meadow before they ever have the chance to reach a basket at all. She takes a moment, kneeling among these lower, humbler flowers, to simply look rather than gather, the way she sometimes allows herself in the meadow more than almost anywhere else on her round, since a meadow at the height of its summer fullness offers more beauty than any single basket could ever properly carry home. The grass moves in long, slow waves under a wind she can hear more than feel this close to the ground. Silver where it catches the light and green where it falls into its own shadow, and scattered through it. Beyond everything she has already gathered, stand a dozen other small flowers she knows by sight, and by old half-remembered name, but has no present use for: ragged robin and bird's foot trefoil and the first tall spikes of foxtail grass, each one simply being, this morning, exactly what it is, without any need to justify its presence by being useful to her in particular. She works the meadow for the better part of another hour, moving slowly from drift to drift, chamomile and yarrow mostly, with a little wild thyme gathered low along the sunniest bank, and a scatter of St. John's wort, not yet quite at its fullest flowering, its small yellow buds only just beginning to open. Noted and left for a later visit closer to Midsummer's Eve, when its old proper hour will finally arrive. By the time the sun stands close to its highest point directly overhead, throwing only a small, tight shadow beneath her feet, instead of the long slanting one that walked ahead of her out of the marsh. The basket has grown heavier still, full now with the whole gathered wealth of the morning, hedgerow and wood and marsh and meadow, all layered together in careful order, and her own body has begun, gently and honestly, to ask for the same thing every working body asks for at this particular hour: a little rest and a little food and a little stillness before the afternoon's work begins. Let this wide, bright meadow settle over you now, warm grass and drowsy bees, and a lark's thin song still falling somewhere far overhead, and let your own body, wherever it is resting, ask for exactly the same gentle thing hers is asking for: a pause, a stillness, a small quiet rest in the very middle of the day. There is an old oak at the edge of the meadow, standing alone where the ploughed land has been kept back from it for longer than anyone can properly say, its low wide branches throwing a deep round pool of shade onto the grass beneath. And this is where she stops, as she has stopped at this same tree on so many midday walks before, to rest. She sets the basket down carefully against the trunk, out of the direct sun, and settles herself onto the cool grass, beside it with the particular unhurried ease of someone who has never once felt the need to eat standing at this hour of the day. Whatever hurry the morning itself might have carried, the bread from the bottom of the basket has grown a little dry through the long morning's walking, but the cheese is still soft, and she eats slowly, breaking small pieces off with her fingers, watching the meadow she has just walked through spread out bright and rippling below the low branches, the whole gathered wealth of the morning resting quietly in the basket beside her: elderflower and nettle, wood sorrel and birch bark and wild garlic, meadowsweet and valerian root, chamomile and yarrow, and a small loose bunch of scabious for the windowsill. It is, she thinks, looking it over with a plain and honest satisfaction, already a very good morning's work, and there is still the whole of the afternoon ahead of her, unclaimed and open, in which to make it better still. The small ale in her flask has gone warm from the walking, but she drinks it gladly all the same, and afterwards she does what she almost always does at this hour, which is very little at all. She leans back against the broad grey trunk of the oak, tips her head back until the leaves above her break the sky into 100 small shifting fragments of blue and green, and simply sits for a while, doing nothing whatsoever that could be called work. This, too, she has come to believe, over so many years of walking this same round, is part of the trade, though no one taught her to think of it that way in so many words. A gatherer who never rests becomes, sooner or later, a careless gatherer, hurrying past small quiet discoveries in the rush to fill the basket faster. And the noon rest under this particular oak has become, over the years, less a pause in her working day than a necessary part of it, as necessary in its own quiet way as the knife, or the basket, or the leather guards at her wrists. A pair of butterflies drift past close enough to touch, rising and falling together over the grass in that loose, tumbling way they have, neither one seeming to lead the other, and she watches them for a long, lazy stretch of time, without any particular thought attached to the watching at all, her mind settling, gradually, into the same wide, unhurried stillness as the whole warm meadow around her. Somewhere off across the fields a dog barks twice and falls silent again. Further away still, faint and carried on the same soft wind that moves the long grass, she can just make out the small sounds of the village going about its own midday business, though from here, under the old oak, it all seems very far away and very gently unimportant, the way the whole busy working world so often seems from beneath a good shade tree in the warm middle of a summer's day. Her thoughts, in this loose, unmoored stretch of the day, wander without any particular order, touching briefly on the small ordinary things that make up the rest of her life beyond the basket and the knife. A hen at home that has taken to laying in the wrong corner of the coop, a promise made to mend a neighbor's kettle before the week is out, the faint hope, not yet spoken aloud to anyone, that the coming harvest will be kinder than the last. None of it presses on her with any real weight. Here in the warm shade, each small thought simply rising and drifting past the way the butterflies rise and drift past, noticed, held for a moment, and let go again without any particular effort. She has found, over the years, that this loose midday rest does more for her than any amount of deliberate, careful thinking ever could. The small tangles of an ordinary life working themselves gently loose on their own, given nothing more than a patch of shade and an hour of unhurried stillness in which to do it. She does not sleep, though she comes close to it more than once, her eyes drifting shut for a long, slow moment before opening again onto the same bright meadow, the same shifting leaves, the same warm, unhurried afternoon light. There is a particular kind of rest, she has always thought, that comes not from proper sleep but from simply allowing the body to stop entirely for a little while, asking nothing of it and expecting nothing from it. And it is this kind of rest, more than any deeper sleep, that she takes now under the old oak, with the basket safe in the shade beside her and the whole gathered morning resting quiet and undisturbed within it. If your own eyes are heavy now, let them close as easily and as fully as hers nearly do. Here in this same warm shade, this same drifting midday stillness, with nothing at all expected of you and nowhere at all you need to be. Let the small, far sounds of a quiet village on a summer afternoon drift past you, the way they drift past her, distant and gentle and entirely without urgency, and rest here a while longer, in the cool, round shadow of the old oak, before the afternoon's slower work begins. When she finally rises from beneath the old oak, brushing the loose grass from her skirt and lifting the basket back onto her hip, The afternoon ahead of her does not simply repeat the morning. A gatherer's year, she has often thought, is really a long, unhurried conversation with the turning seasons, each month asking a slightly different question of the land and offering, in return, a slightly different set of answers, and no single day, however full, ever manages to hold the whole of it. This particular afternoon, in the fullness of early summer, is only one small part of a much longer round that began for her, back in the thin cold light of very early spring, and will not properly finish until the last root of autumn has been lifted and the drying loft stands full against the coming winter. Spring had opened, as it always opens, with the nettle, the very first green thing brave enough to push up through soil still cold from winter. Gathered then not for its top leaves alone, but for its whole tender early growth, worked into a simple pottage that had, more than once in a hard year, been the first fresh green food a household had tasted since the autumn before. Close behind the nettle had come the dandelion, root and leaf and flower, all useful in their own separate ways, and the cleavers, sticky and clinging and strangely gentle in what it offered a body still heavy and sluggish from the long dark months indoors. Spring, she has always thought, is a season of cleansing and quiet renewal, and the plants that answer to it seem, almost without exception, to understand that purpose better than she could ever explain it in so many words. Then had come the turn into early summer, and with it the hawthorn blossom, gathered briefly at its very opening for a gentle steadying of a tired or an anxious heart, and the elder flower she had taken only this very morning, and the first cutting of the meadowsweet before it stood at its full and heaviest height. Midsummer itself, still a few weeks off yet, would bring the herb she had marked, but not yet gathered, the small yellow-flowered plant that likes the sun above almost anything else growing in this whole country. Its virtue, said by every old teaching she has ever heard, to stand at its very highest on the single longest day of the year. Cut then and hung to dry in bunches from the rafters of the loft, until the whole low room carries its faint golden scent, right through into the following spring. She sometimes tries, walking this same stretch of afternoon path, to picture the whole year at once, the way she once pictured, briefly, the whole shape of a single day from the vantage of the standing stones on the low hill. She has not yet reached this particular afternoon, but will reach before evening falls. It is harder to hold a whole year in the mind that same way, since a year cannot be seen all at once from any single hilltop, only remembered, piece by piece, backward across 12 long turning months. Spring's cold green beginning, summer's warm generous heart, autumn's slow downward gathering, winter's long patient stillness, each season handing the next its own particular gift, the way one runner in a relay hands a baton forward to another, never pausing, never truly stopping, only ever changing gently from one steady hand into the next. After midsummer would come the long steady heart of the season, chamomile and yarrow at their fullest, as she has gathered them only this same morning, and behind them, close on their heels, the lavender in the close garden by the house, and the first ripening of the wild berries along the hedgerow she walked at dawn, elderberry still weeks away, but rosy hip and blackberry not far behind it. Late summer would bring the roots of certain plants at their strongest, valerian chief among them, though she has learned over the years that a little of it can be safely lifted in early summer too, as she did this very morning, so long as she leaves the greater part of the plant undisturbed to build its full strength again by the proper autumn digging. Autumn, when it finally arrived, would turn her attention downward, away from flower and leaf and toward root and bark, comfrey and burdock, and the deeper stores of valerian, all of it drawing its strength down into the earth, just as the whole visible world above ground began, in its own turn, to fade and fall, and prepare itself for winter. And winter itself, when the ground finally hardened and the gathering slowed almost to nothing, would become instead a season of use rather than collection. The whole drying loft above the house, standing full of a summer's careful work, jar after jar and bundle after bundle waiting patiently through the cold months to be called upon exactly as they were needed. A tea for a fever, a poultice for a wound, a calming draught for a mind kept too long awake by worry or by grief. It had been the old physician up at the manor, on that same long afternoon she had spent with his borrowed herbal open before her, who had first put a proper shape to what she had already half known from years of her own quiet observing. The virtue of a plant, he had told her, gathering the words slowly, as though reaching for something half remembered from a manuscript read long before, does not sit still within it through the whole year like water in a jar. It moves, season by season, the way blood is said to move through a body, gathering in one part of the plant, and then another as the year turns, root in winter's rest, leaf and stem in the rising of spring, flower at the very height of summer's strength, seed and fruit in autumn's slow gathering in. A wise gatherer, he had said, learns to follow that movement rather than fight against it, taking each part of each plant only in its own proper season and leaving all the rest of the year's work to patience. She thinks now, walking on from the shade of the old oak into the warmer, brighter stretch of afternoon ahead of her, of how much of this same knowledge lies quietly scattered across the whole width of her small world, in the physician's careful borrowed manuscript. Yes, but just as much in the practiced hands of the midwife 2 villages over, who has her own long list of exactly which herb eases, exactly which trouble of childbirth, and exactly when in the year it must be gathered to hold its full strength, and in the quiet infirmary garden, kept by the small community of monks a half-day's walk to the north, whose careful rows of labelled beds she has visited only twice in her life, but has never forgotten, each plant set apart from its neighbours, and tended with a patience that seemed, to her, almost a form of prayer in itself. No single person holds the whole of this knowledge. It lives spread out, in fragments, across many hands and many memories, a decoction remembered here, an infusion perfected there, a tincture some careful hand in a distant town has learned to steep just so, and it is only by all of them working quietly on, each in their own small corner of the world, that the whole slow patient craft is kept alive at all, season after season, year after year, long after any single one of them is gone. She has noticed, too, over her own long years of walking this same round, that the seasons themselves are never quite as neatly divided as the old sayings sometimes make them sound, one giving way cleanly to the next the way a page turns in a book. Spring lingers stubbornly into what ought, by the calendar, to already be summer, in a cold wet corner of the wood, where the light struggles to properly reach the ground, while a sheltered, sun-caught bank further along the very same hedge might already be running a full fortnight ahead of its neighbours, its plants flowering and fading well before the rest of the parish has caught up. A gatherer who trusts the calendar alone, without also trusting her own eyes and her own long-practiced sense of any particular patch of ground, will find herself, sooner or later, either too early or too late for exactly the plant she has walked all that way to find. It is this constant small adjusting, patch by patch and year by year, rather than any single fixed rule, that she has come to think of as the true heart of choosing rightly by the season, a skill built less from memorizing a list of months than from simply paying close, patient attention to one particular stretch of country, walked and re-walked, until its own particular rhythms become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. The afternoon ahead of her today, she reminds herself, gathering her thoughts back to the ground immediately in front of her feet, calls for none of autumn's roots and none of midsummer's not yet ready gold. It calls simply for more of what the morning has already given her, the boundary hedge in its afternoon light, and a small errand she means to run before the day grows too old, and then the long walk home, and the sorting, and the drying loft, and all the quiet, unglamorous work that turns a full basket into a store that will still be giving comfort to someone, somewhere, months and months from now, long after this particular warm afternoon has been entirely forgotten by everyone but her. Let the whole slow wheel of the seasons turn gently behind your own closing eyes now. Spring's first green nettle giving way to summer's flower giving way, in its own unhurried time, to autumn's root, and winter's quiet rest completing the circle before it begins, patiently, to turn again. There is nothing to hold on to in any of it, only the slow, easy turning, season after season, exactly as it has always turned, exactly as it will go on turning long after tonight. The path from the old oak leads her along the top edge of a long, sloping field, and here, where the ground is dry and open, and there is little enough to gather for a stretch, her hands find their own quiet occupation instead, turning the small curved knife over once or twice as she walks, testing its edge lightly against the pad of her thumb, the way she tests it a dozen times in the course of any ordinary day. It is not a fine blade, by the standards of the smith's finest work-up at the manor. It has never needed to be. What it needs, and what it has always had, since the first year she carried it, is a particular kind of sharpness suited exactly to its particular kind of work, not the long clean edge that opens a wound or splits a length of kindling, but a shorter, gentler curve that slips beneath the stem with almost no resistance at all and lifts. Rather than saws or tears, the whole cut done and finished before the plant itself has had time, so to speak, to notice. She thinks, walking this quiet stretch of open field, of the very first time she was ever allowed to hold this same knife, or rather its predecessor, a smaller, plainer blade her mother had kept for exactly this purpose of teaching, worn dull on purpose so a small child's careless hand could do no real harm with it. She had been perhaps 7 years old, she thinks, though the memory has softened at its edges the way all early memories do, standing in almost this exact stretch of hedgerow, with her mother's hand closed gently over her own small one, guiding the blade, showing her again and again the single motion that would over the following years become so deeply worn into her body that she no longer has to think about it at all. Not a stab, her mother had told her, over and over, in the patient repeating way that all the truest lessons of this trade seem to be taught. Not a tear and not a hack. A single clean drawing motion, close to the base of the stem, angled slightly, so the cut heals quickly and cleanly, and the plant loses as little of itself as possible to the taking. It had taken years, she knows now, looking back on it, for that single motion to become truly her own rather than simply an instruction remembered and obeyed. She had torn more stems than she could ever count in those first clumsy seasons, bruised more leaves, wasted in her early carelessness. Far more of the woods and the hedges and the meadow's generosity than any careful gatherer ever should. Her mother had never once scolded her harshly for it. She remembers, only shown her, again, patiently. The same motion, the same angle, the same light, unhurried pressure, trusting that the body would learn, eventually, what the mind alone could never quite manage to hold onto through simple instruction. And it had learned, in the end, the way a body always eventually learns anything asked of it often enough and patiently enough, until the motion required no thought at all, until her hand simply knew, the moment it closed around a stem, exactly how much pressure the cutting would need, and exactly where the blade ought to fall. This, she has come to believe, is the real heart of the whole trade, more than any single fact about any single plant, more even than the moon and the hour, and the turning season she was turning over in her mind, only a short while ago beneath the old oak. A gatherer's true skill lives less in what she knows than in what her hands have learned to do without conscious knowing at all, the exact pressure of a careful cut. The exact moment a root has loosened enough in the soil to lift without tearing. The exact gentleness required to lay a bruised, petalled flower into a basket without crushing what little strength it still holds. No manuscript, however carefully copied by however patient a hand, in however distant an abbey, could ever fully teach this particular kind of knowledge. It has to be walked into the body, one careful cut at a time, across years and years of ordinary, unremarkable mornings just like this one, until the knowing settles so deep it no longer feels like knowledge at all, only habit, only instinct, only the simple, easy rightness of a hand that has done this same small motion 10,000 times before and will, if she is fortunate enough to keep her health and her eyes, do it 10,000 times more before she is through. She has begun, these last few years, to teach a little of it herself, to a niece with quick eyes and an eager, still slightly clumsy hand, walking the same paths with her on quieter mornings, guiding the same small curved knife, the same careful way her own mother once guided hers. It gives her a particular kind of pleasure she has not often felt in any other part of her working life. Watching a young hand slowly, gradually, cut after cut, season after season, begin to find that same easy unthinking rightness that took her own hand so many patient years to learn. There is a kind of long, slow continuity in it that comforts her more than she has ever quite managed to put into words, the sense of a single unbroken thread of careful, gentle taking running back through her own mother and grandmother, back through women and men whose names have long since been forgotten, all the way to whoever it was, in some distant, unremembered morning, at the very beginning of things, first knelt beside a wild growing plant and learned, patiently, exactly how much of it could be taken without harm, and exactly how much needed always to be left behind. She remembers too, though the memory is a good deal less comfortable than the one of her mother's guiding hand, the single occasion in her whole working life when she came closest to losing a finger to her own carelessness, a rushed cut taken at the very end of a long, tiring day, hurrying to beat a coming rain that never, in the end, arrived. The blade slipping sideways off a tougher stem than she had judged it to be, and opening a shallow line across the base of her thumb that bled freely for the better part of an hour before it finally stopped. She had sat down exactly where she stood, she remembers, and pressed a crushed handful of yarrow leaf hard against the cut. The same plain remedy she trusts above all others for exactly this purpose, and waited patiently for the bleeding to slow, and she has never once, in all the years since, allowed herself to hurry a cut again, however close the coming weather or however long the day had already grown. It had been, she has always thought since, a fair enough lesson for a light enough cost, and she has passed the story on to her niece more than once, not as a frightening tale, but as a plain practical warning. The way her own mother passed on so many of her own harder learned lessons before her. She thinks, too, walking this quiet dry stretch of field with the sun now fully overhead, of how strange it would seem to a stranger passing through, someone from a distant town perhaps, who set any real value only on things that could be counted, weighed, or sold at a market stall, to learn that so much careful attention, spread across a whole long working life, has gone into the mastering of a single small motion of the wrist, a single angle of a small curved blade against a single ordinary stem. And yet she has come to believe, turning it over again now as she has turned it over so many times before on this same stretch of path, that a life is very often made, in the end, from exactly this kind of narrow, deep mastery, rather than from any wide scattering of half-learned things. One small motion practiced so many thousand times that it stops being a motion at all and becomes, instead, simply a part of who she is, as fully her own as the sound of her own voice, or the particular way she has always walked, unhurried, with the basket riding easy against her hip. There is a particular quiet pride, too, that she allows herself only rarely, and only in moments exactly like this one, walking alone along an empty stretch of path, with no one to hear her thinking it, in simply being good at this one small, humble, entirely unglamorous thing. She will never be remembered the way a great physician is remembered, her name set down carefully in some manuscript for scholars to study long after she is gone. She will likely not even be remembered by name beyond her own niece's grandchildren, if she is remembered at all. But the knife in her hand does exactly what a knife should do, and her eye finds exactly what needs finding, and her judgment, tested and proven across so many patient years, very rarely leads her wrong. And there is a plain, sturdy satisfaction in that kind of quiet competence that she has come to value more, if she is honest with herself, than almost any grander recognition the wider world might ever have thought to offer her instead. The field opens ahead of her now onto the long, low boundary hedge that marks the far edge of the village's common ground. Thick and tangled and rich, with a whole different set of gifts than the wilder hedge she walked at dawn, and she quickens her pace only very slightly, the knife settling back into its familiar place at her belt, her mind turning, unhurried. From the long patient history of her craft toward the particular small tasks that this particular afternoon still has waiting for her. Let your own hands rest now, wherever they are resting, as easy and as unburdened as hers rest at her side, carrying nothing more than the small, quiet weight of a well-worn knife and a lifetime of patient, careful learning. There is nothing more that needs doing in this moment. There is only the walking and the warm afternoon light and the long boundary hedge waiting ahead, unhurried, exactly as it has always waited. The boundary hedge, in this slanting afternoon light, looks almost nothing like the dawn hedgerow she walked so many hours ago, though it is built of much the same tangle of hawthorn and blackthorn and bramble, much the same deep green wall, dividing one piece of ground from another. The light has changed everything about it. Where the morning light had come low and gold and gentle, picking out the dew on every leaf, the afternoon sun now stands high enough to pour straight down over the top of the hedge, warming its whole southern face until the air around it seems to shimmer faintly, thick with the mingled scent of a dozen different green and flowering things all warmed at once. The dog rose claims the sunniest stretch of this particular hedge, scrambling up through the darker thorn behind it and spilling its pale pink, open-faced flowers out over the top in loose, generous sprays. Each bloom no more than 5 simple petals around a bright cluster of golden center, nothing like the tight, cultivated roses kept in the manor's walled garden, and lovelier for it, she has always thought. In a plainer and more honest way, she gathers the petals rather than the whole flower, working carefully so as not to bruise them, taking only from the blooms fully open, and letting the many buds still closed along the same stem continue on toward the small, hard green hips that will, come autumn, ripen to a deep glowing red and give the whole household a store of the sharp, sweet preserve that carries a family gently and reliably through the worst of the winter coughs. Rose petal alone she keeps mostly for its scent, a small handful dried and kept in a linen bag tucked among the good linens in the chest at home, though a strong enough infusion of it, she has been taught, can also cool a fever gently when other, stronger remedies feel too harsh for a small child to bear. Honeysuckle winds through the same stretch of hedge. Its long trumpet flowers pale cream, shading to a deeper gold at the throat, and the smell of it, this late in the afternoon with the sun still warming it directly, is so rich and so sweet that she pauses simply to stand beside it for a moment before she gathers anything at all, breathing it in the way she might breathe in the smell of new bread, purely for the pleasure of it. She takes only a small handful of the flowers, twisted gently free rather than cut, enough for a soothing syrup that has more than once eased a child's rough cough through a long restless night and leaves the greater tangled mass of the vine untouched, since honeysuckle, generous as it is with its scent, gives up its full sweetness reluctantly to the gatherer and rewards patience far more than persistence. Between the dog rose and the honeysuckle, tucked into a shadier fold of the hedge, where the sun reaches only for an hour or two at midday, she finds a small stand of wild angelica just beginning to show its first pale green flower heads, the tall hollow stems still soft enough to bend easily under a testing thumb. She has always thought angelica a rather stately plant, standing taller than almost anything else in this stretch of hedge, its broad ridged leaves spreading wide before the flower stalk rises above them. And though it is not yet ready for its own proper gathering, the stem being wanted candied and preserved rather than dried, a task better suited to high summer than to this early stretch of the season. She takes a moment all the same to check it over carefully, noting how quickly it has grown since her last visit, tucking the knowledge away against the fuller harvest still some weeks off. Lower down, where the hedge bank falls away into the shaded ditch that runs alongside the path, the young bramble leaves grow soft and pale green at the very tips of this year's new growth, and these she takes in a modest handful too, careful to choose only the tender uppermost leaves rather than the tougher, older growth further down the stem, since it is these young leaves, dried carefully and steeped gently, that make the plain astringent tea her own grandmother swore could settle almost any trouble of the stomach a body could name. The berries themselves, dark and sweet and heavy, are still many weeks away, hidden now inside small hard green knots scattered along the same canes, and she notes their position the way she noted the hawthorn haws at dawn, filing it away for a return visit when the season has properly turned toward late summer. A robin follows her along this stretch of the hedge with the same bold, unhurried curiosity robins have always shown her, hopping from branch to branch a little ahead of her rather than fleeing outright, watching with a bright dark eye as her hands move among the roses and the honeysuckle and the bramble, and she talks to it a little as she works, in the low unthinking murmur she has always used with the small, watching creatures of her working days, more habit than conversation, a kind of company kept without any real expectation of being understood. It is a small thing, and she has never given it much thought beyond the simple pleasure of it, but she has come to notice, over the years, that a morning or an afternoon spent talking, quietly, to birds and bees and the occasional watching fox has always left her feeling a little less alone in her work than the plain silent walking of it might otherwise leave her. Even on the days she meets no other living soul at all, between the moment she steps out her own low door and the moment she steps back through it again at dusk, near the very end of the hedge, where an old gate hangs between two mossy posts marking the boundary of the common ground proper, she comes upon a stand of cessed johns wort further along than the shy buds she noted in the meadow that morning, this particular patch catching a fuller measure of afternoon sun, and so running a little ahead of its cooler cousins, 3 or 4 blooms already fully open, small and bright and 5-petaled, each one marked faintly, if she holds it up to the light just so, with tiny translucent dots scattered across the petal like a scattering of fine pinpricks. She does not gather it yet. Its proper hour, the old teaching insists, is still a little more than a week off, the very eve of midsummer itself, and she has never once seen good reason to doubt a teaching so widely and so consistently held across every gatherer she has ever known. But she marks the spot carefully in her mind, counting the paces back from the mossy gate so that on the appointed morning she need waste no time searching for what she already knows today exactly where to find. She lingers a moment longer at the gate itself, resting her free hand on its weathered top bar, looking back along the whole warm, shimmering length of hedge she has just walked, rose and honeysuckle and bramble all catching the same slanting gold light, and allows herself the small unhurried pleasure of simply admiring a piece of work well done. A whole afternoon's careful gathering laid out behind her in memory, the way the basket lays it out, more plainly, at her hip. There is no one here to see her pause, and she has never needed anyone to see it in order to feel it. This particular quiet satisfaction that comes, again and again, at odd unremarkable moments throughout a day, spent doing work she has chosen, over so many years now, to go on doing simply because it suits her, and because the world, in its own quiet way, seems glad enough to have her doing it. The basket, by the time she has worked her way to the far end of this stretch of boundary hedge, has grown heavier than at almost any point in the whole long day. Rose petal and honeysuckle flower and young bramble leaf layered in among everything the wood and the marsh and the meadow had already given her, and she shifts it from one hip to the other, working a little of the ache out of her shoulder, and looks ahead along the path to where it bends away from the hedge and down toward a small cluster of cottages she can just make out through the trees, smoke rising thin and straight from one chimney in the still afternoon air. There is one small errand still waiting for her there, before the day turns properly toward home. A delivery long promised and not yet made, and she quickens her step, only a little toward it. Let the warm scent of that afternoon hedge settle over you now. Rose and honeysuckle and green bramble leaf all mingled together in the still slanting light, and let a small bold robin hop along somewhere, just ahead of your own drifting attention, patient and curious and entirely unafraid, while the path bends gently on toward a low cottage and its waiting door. The cottage she is walking toward belongs to the woman the village calls, simply and without any need of further explanation, the midwife, though her skill reaches well beyond the bringing of children into the world and touches, in one quiet way or another, almost every household in the parish sooner or later. She is older than the gatherer by perhaps 20 years, a small upright woman with hands roughened by a lifetime of exactly the kind of careful, patient work that leaves no visible mark on the world except, again and again, a life safely delivered, a fever safely broken, a grief somehow made a little more bearable, simply by the presence of someone who has sat beside enough grief before to know how to sit beside it well. The two of them have worked alongside each other, in their own separate ways, for as long as the gatherer has been walking these paths on her own account, and a quiet, easy trade has grown up between them over the years, without either of them ever quite deciding to arrange it formally. The gatherer brings what the wood and the marsh and the meadow give up most freely, the meadowsweet, the raspberry leaf gathered later in the season, the chamomile for a mother too anxious to rest in the last heavy weeks before her time, and the midwife, in turn, has taught her, slowly and patiently across a great many quiet afternoons exactly like this one, a good deal of what she knows about which of these gathered things does its gentlest and surest work in the particular delicate business of bringing a new life safely into the world and easing a mother's body through all that follows after. The door stands open to the afternoon warmth, as it usually does at this hour, and the midwife looks up from where she sits on a low stool just inside it, working at some fine mending by the good light of the doorway, and smiles the small, unhurried smile of someone entirely unsurprised by a visitor, since a gatherer's habits walked the same round for so many years, become as well known to a whole small village as the striking of the church bell. "Well met," she says, setting the mending aside. "And how has the wood used you today?" It is not really a question that expects a full answer, more a kind of greeting worn smooth by long repetition, the same easy words exchanged at the start of 100 earlier visits. And the gatherer answers it the same easy way, setting the heavy basket down just inside the cool doorway and easing her shoulder with a small private wince that draws a knowing, sympathetic look from the older woman. She has come today with a particular purpose, beyond the pleasure of the visit itself, a promised bundle of dried raspberry leaf from her own store at home, saved back from the previous autumn's drying for exactly this moment, since the midwife has a young mother 3 cottages along the lane whose time is drawing close and who has, this past week, grown restless and uneasy with the waiting the way so many first mothers do in these final weeks. She lifts the small cloth-wrapped bundle from a fold of her cloak, where it has ridden safely all through the morning's wetter work, and sets it into the midwife's waiting hands, and watches the older woman's face soften with the particular quiet gladness of someone receiving exactly the small practical help she had been hoping for. They sit together for a while in the cool shade of the doorway, the gatherer glad of the rest after a long morning's walking, the midwife glad of the company after what has clearly been a quiet, uneventful stretch of days, and the talk between them moves easily from one small ordinary thing to another, the way talk always moves between 2 people who have known each other's working rhythms for a great many years. The midwife asks after the elder trees along the dawn hedgerow, whether they are flowering well this year, and the gatherer tells her of the wide cream plates of blossom she left mostly untouched for the bees, and the midwife nods, satisfied, and says something about the cordial she means to ask for again this autumn, once the berries have properly darkened. There is talk, too, of harder things, briefly and without any great weight laid upon it. A child 2 farms over who took a bad fever the week before and has, thank all mercy, finally begun to mend. An old man at the far end of the village whose joints have grown too painful this past winter for him to manage the stairs to his own loft any longer. The gatherer promises, without being asked directly, to leave a little of the birch bark she gathered this very morning at his door before the week is out, and the midwife thanks her with the plain, unfussy gratitude of someone who has long since stopped being surprised by such small, quiet kindnesses passing back and forth between the working women of a small, close village, each of them doing, in her own way, exactly what her own particular skill allows. It occurs to the gatherer, sitting there in the cool doorway, with the afternoon light falling warm across the threshold, that this quiet exchange, small and unremarkable as it seems, is really the whole deeper purpose of everything she does out in the hedgerow and the wood and the marsh, more than the gathering itself, more even than the careful drying and storing that will occupy so much of her evening. A basket full of herbs, however carefully chosen and however rightly timed to the moon and the season, means very little sitting alone on a shelf. It only becomes what it was always meant to become in this kind of quiet exchange, passed from one careful pair of hands to another, carried 3 cottages along a lane, steeped into a cup that eases a restless mother's waiting, or laid gently against an old man's aching knee. The whole long morning of walking and cutting and careful choosing has been in the end only the first half of a much longer and much gentler kind of work, and this small unhurried visit, this quiet passing of a cloth, wrapped bundle from one hand to another, is very much a part of the same craft as the knife and the basket. Even if no manuscript anywhere would ever think to write it down as such. Before she rises to go, the midwife asks after the niece too, as she always asks, remembering the girl's own small clumsy hands from a visit 2 summers past, when she had come along on one of these same rounds. And the gatherer tells her, with the same plain unhurried pride she feels every time the subject comes up, how steady the girl's cutting hand has grown this past year, how quick her eye for a plant already is, how she means, if the season allows it, to bring her along to gather Staid John's wort on the coming Midsummer's Eve. The midwife nods at this with real warmth, since she herself learned her own trade from an older woman now many years gone, and understands, better than most, exactly what it means to watch a careful skill pass safely from one steady pair of hands into another, one generation at a time, each new gatherer or midwife carrying forward a little more of a knowledge too large and too old for any single lifetime to hold in full. She stays only a short while longer, mindful of the afternoon still ahead of her and the long walk home still to come, and rises at last, gathering the basket back onto her hip, lighter now by one small bundle, but somehow, she always thinks, leaving this particular doorway feels lighter still than the weight of the basket alone could ever account for. The midwife walks her the few steps back out into the lane, promises to send word of the young mother 3 cottages along once her time has properly come, and stands watching a moment longer as the gatherer turns back toward the path that will carry her by a longer, slower way home. Let this small, quiet exchange settle over you now. 2 women who have known each other's work for years, sitting together a little while in the cool shade of an open doorway, passing something small and carefully kept from one steady pair of hands into another. There is nothing more restful in the end than the simple sight of one person helping another in some small ordinary way, asking nothing in return but the same help offered back, someday, when it is needed. She does not take the short way home from the midwife's cottage, though a short way exists, a straight half-mile along the cart track that would have her back at her own door within the quarter hour. She has never much cared for the short way home, not on a fine afternoon like this one, and today, with the sun still high enough and the whole rest of the evening still open ahead of her, she turns instead along the longer, slower path that loops out past the mill pond and the standing stones on the low hill before finally curving back toward her own small house at the far edge of the village. It adds the better part of an hour to her walking, and she has never once regretted the extra hour, not in all the years she has been choosing it. The mill pond lies still and bright under the afternoon sun, the great wooden wheel turning slowly at its edge, with the same patient unhurried rhythm as everything else about this particular day. Water sheeting off each paddle in a bright constant fall that catches the light and scatters it, for a moment, into something almost like a small manufactured rainbow before it vanishes back into the dark moving water below. She pauses on the low bridge that crosses the leat just above the wheel, resting the basket on the stone parapet for a moment, and watches the water for a while the way she watched the heron earlier in the marsh, without any particular purpose, beyond the simple pleasure of watching something patient and steady doing the same unhurried work. It has done every day of her whole life, and will likely go on doing for a great many lives beyond her own. The miller's wife waves to her from the low window of the mill house as she crosses the bridge, and she waves back, though there is no time today for more than that small passing greeting, the sun having already begun its own long, slow decline toward the western hills, in a way that reminds her, gently, that the afternoon, however unhurried it feels, is not without its own quiet limits. There is still the drying loft to see to before the light fails entirely, and a basket's worth of careful sorting to be done before that, and she has learned, over many years of misjudging exactly this stretch of the day, not to let the pleasant idle pull of a fine afternoon carry her too far past the hour when the evening's real work still needs to begin. Beyond the mill pond the path climbs, gently at first and then more steeply, up onto the low hill that stands at the edge of the parish, crowned with a small ring of grey standing stones far older, everyone agrees, than the village itself, older even, some say, than the church whose square tower she can just make out now, small and pale, away across the fields behind her. She does not know, and has never much troubled herself to ask, who raised these stones or exactly how long ago, only that they have stood here, patient and silent and faintly leaning, for longer than any single memory in the whole parish could properly account for, and that she has always found, climbing up among them on a fine afternoon like this one, a particular kind of stillness that she finds almost nowhere else on her whole long round. She sets the basket down in the long grass at the center of the ring, and stands a while among the stones, catching her breath after the climb, looking back the way she has come, the whole long shape of her day spread out below her in the softening afternoon light, the dark line of the wood, the pale gleam of the marsh beyond it, the wide gold sweep of the meadow, the old oak standing solitary at its edge, the long boundary hedge, the thin rising smoke of the cottages clustered around the midwife's small house. It is a rare thing, she thinks, standing there among the old silent stones, to see a whole day's walking laid out so plainly all at once, the way it so seldom is while she is actually inside the walking of it, one small task following another with barely a pause to consider the whole shape of the thing. From up here, for just this one quiet moment, she can see it all together, hedgerow and wood and marsh and meadow and hedge again, one long unbroken circle of green, and something in that wide unhurried view settles her, the way very little else in the whole of her working day quite manages to settle her. The wind moves gently through the standing stones as she rests among them, carrying with it the mingled scent of everything the basket now holds: elderflower and nettle, wood sorrel and wild garlic, meadowsweet and valerian, chamomile and yarrow, rose petal and honeysuckle, and young bramble leaf, a whole day's worth of green and flowering things all settling together into one warm, complicated, entirely pleasant smell that she has come, over the years, to think of almost as the smell of the season itself, the particular scent that means, more surely than any calendar. That early summer has properly arrived and is standing for now at the very height of its own quiet generosity. She does not linger too long among the stones, mindful again of the sinking sun, but gathers the basket back up and continues on, down the far slope of the hill, and along the last stretch of path that winds gently back toward the village and her own small house at its edge. The light has begun, in earnest now, to take on the deeper gold of late afternoon, long shadows stretching out ahead of her from every tree and hedge and standing stone, the air cooling very slightly with each passing quarter hour, and the birds, which fell mostly quiet through the hot still middle of the day, have begun to stir again into a second, gentler chorus, different from the bright, urgent singing of the dawn, but lovely in its own softer way, a settling kind of birdsong rather than a waking one. Her feet know this last stretch of path so well that she barely needs to look where she is walking, and her mind drifts, unhurried, over the whole long shape of the day behind her, the hedgerow at first light, the deep green hush of the wood, the careful footing of the marsh, the wide bright meadow, the rest beneath the old oak, the long boundary hedge in its afternoon warmth, the quiet visit at the midwife's door, the wide silent view from among the standing stones. It has been, by any honest measure, a very full day, and yet nothing about the walking of it has felt hurried, or forced, or driven by anything sharper than the plain steady rhythm of the work itself, one small gathering following another, one quiet pause following each small labor, the whole long shape of it moving at exactly the pace a body was always meant to move, no faster and no slower. She passes on the last stretch of path before the fields give way properly to the lane, the small wayside shrine kept at the fork, where the road to the mill splits from the road to the church, no more than a weathered wooden post with a carved figure worn nearly smooth by rain and years, and a scatter of small offerings left at its base by passing hands, a few late spring flowers gone brown now, a bent farthing, a twist of ribbon faded almost colorless. She has never been a especially devout woman, not in the way the priest up at the church would perhaps prefer, but she pauses here all the same, as she nearly always pauses on this particular stretch of the homeward path, and sets down, without any great ceremony, a small sprig of the meadowsweet still in her basket. A plain wordless offering of thanks for a day that has, by any honest measure, given her a great deal more than it has asked of her in return. It is a habit she could not easily explain to anyone who pressed her on it, only that it has always felt right to mark, in some small way, the quiet debt a gatherer owes to the whole generous turning world she walks through, day after day, taking so freely and so gratefully from its abundance. Her own small house comes into view at last, where the path drops down toward the edge of the village, its low thatched roof catching the last of the strong gold light. Smoke already curling faintly from the chimney, where she banked the coals that morning, and the sight of it, however many hundred times she has walked toward it, at exactly this hour, still carries the same small quiet lift of gladness it has always carried, the particular gladness of a long day's outward work turning, at last, toward home. Let your own tired body drift now, the way hers drifts along this last long stretch of homeward path, unhurried, at ease, carrying the whole gathered weight of a full and gentle day, while the light softens toward gold around you, and a low thatched roof waits, patient and warm, somewhere just ahead. The house welcomes her with the same low quiet it held when she left it, still and cool inside, after the warmth of the open path. the banked coals in the hearth breathing, faintly just as they were at dawn, waiting patiently to be woken back into a proper fire, once the evening's other work is done. She sets the basket down at last, on the long scrubbed table beneath the small window, and stands for a moment simply looking at it, at the whole heaped, tangled, fragrant weight of a full day's gathering, before she begins the slower, quieter second half of her work, the part of the trade that no one watching her walk the wood or the meadow would ever think to picture, and yet the part on which everything else, in the end, truly depends. A basket of freshly gathered herbs, however carefully chosen, however rightly timed to the moon and the hour, is a fragile and a fleeting kind of wealth. Left too long as it is, piled together and warm from carrying, it begins almost at once to lose the very virtue it was gathered to keep, the tender leaves wilting and pressing flat against each other, the delicate flowers bruising under their own soft weight, the whole morning's careful patience undone within a single neglected hour by nothing more dramatic than simple crowding and simple heat. So she does not rest for long after the walking is done. She washes her hands at the basin by the door, ties a plain apron over her dress in place of the traveling one, and begins, unhurried but steady, to sort. The table is laid out for exactly this purpose, as it always is at the end of a gathering day. A row of shallow, woven trays and flat wicker frames waiting along its length, each one destined for a different part of the loft above and a different length of drying time. Leaves go to one side, spread thin and never overlapping, since a leaf laid too thickly on another will hold its moisture and turn dark and slick rather than pale and papery, wasting whole days of gathering to nothing more than a handful of good compost. She begins with the nettle, working quickly but without any real haste, spreading the young top leaves out across the first of the trays in a single loose layer, and then the wood sorrel beside it, and the wild garlic in its own separate tray further along, since garlic, generous as it is with its scent, will happily lend that same sharp green odor to every other herb drying anywhere near it, if it is not kept properly apart. The flowers asked for a gentler hand still. The elder flower heads, gathered whole this morning, and not yet stripped from their stems, she lays out with particular care, since bruised petals turn brown far faster than whole ones and lose a good part of their sweetness in the turning. The chamomile she has already begun, almost without noticing, to strip gently from its stems as she works, small pale flower heads tumbling loose into a shallow bowl, a task her hands know so well by now that her mind is free to wander well ahead of them, toward the loft, toward tomorrow, toward the small errand of birch bark still owed to the old man at the far end of the village. The rose petals and the honeysuckle blooms go into their own tray, and the yarrow, its tough flat, clustered heads needing rather less careful handling than the more delicate blooms around it, into another. The roots take longer and a different kind of attention altogether. The valerian, still wrapped in its own separate cloth from the marsh, comes out dark and damp and heavy with the smell she has long since made her peace with, earthy and strange and, to her nose alone perhaps, not entirely unpleasant. She works over a second basin set on the floor beside the table, washing the clinging black mud away in several changes of cold water until the root shows pale and clean beneath it, then slicing it with a heavier knife kept for exactly this purpose. into thin, even rounds that will dry far faster and far more evenly than the whole unsliced root ever could, spreading these two across their own tray, well apart from anything green or flowering, since valerian root, drying, has never once in her whole life smelled anything remotely like the sweetness of a flower, and has no business, in her firm opinion, sharing a tray with one. The birch bark she peels into thinner curling strips than it left the tree already looking, working with the flat of her small knife against the grain to loosen the outer layer without splitting it, and lays these out in their own careful row, since bark dries unevenly if it is left to curl and buckle on its own, and a well-flattened strip, weighted lightly at its edges through the first day of drying, gives a far cleaner, more even piece once it is fully cured, easier to break and measure later, when the winter's need for it finally arrives. She works, as she always works at this table, with the small window open a crack beside her, letting the last of the day's warm outside air move gently through the room and across the spread trays, since even indoors, she has always believed, a growing thing prefers to feel a little of the same living air it grew up breathing, rather than being shut away too abruptly into close, still darkness. A blackbird has taken to singing most evenings from the low apple tree just beyond that same window, and it sings now too, unhurried and rich and endlessly inventive, filling the small kitchen with a bright warm sound that keeps her steady company through the whole long careful business of sorting, the same way the dawn chorus kept her company, setting out so many hours before. The whole day, she thinks, bookended neatly by birdsong, waking birdsong at one end and settling birdsong at the other, with the whole long green walk of the day held safely between them. Tate is careful, unhurried, repetitive work, and she has come, over the years, to love it in its own quiet way, almost as much as she loves the walking itself, though it asks a very different kind of attention. The walking is outward and wide, eyes moving constantly across a whole shifting landscape, ears open to bird song and running water, and the small rustling movement of things unseen in the hedge. The sorting is inward and close, the whole world narrowed down to the small immediate business of one leaf, one root, one flower head at a time, laid just so, spaced just right, given exactly the small careful attention that will let it dry cleanly rather than spoil. She has sometimes thought that a whole life could be lived well simply by learning to move easily between these two kinds of attention, the wide outward looking and the close careful tending, and that a gatherer's day, more than most working days, teaches exactly that particular lesson, over and over, without ever needing to say so aloud. Now and then, as she works down the long row of trays, she pauses to lift a small handful of something already dried from an earlier gathering, testing it idly between her fingers the way a baker might test a loaf, feeling for exactly the right crisp papery lightness that tells her a leaf has given up all it is going to give up to the air, and is ready, now, to be crumbled into its jar. A leaf gone truly dry snaps rather than bends and crumbles between finger and thumb into a fine even dust rather than a damp bruised clump. And she has learned this small distinction so thoroughly over so many years that she barely needs her eyes for it at all. Her fingers alone telling her everything she needs to know about whether a particular tray is ready for the jar or wants another day or two yet in the gentle moving air of the loft above. The light through the small window has begun, by the time she finishes the last of the sorting, to take on the deep amber color. That means the sun has dropped well toward the western hills, and the whole table before her now stands transformed from the single tangled heap that came in through the door an hour or more before into a long, orderly row of shallow trays, each one holding its own single careful kind of gathered green or root or flower, spaced and settled and ready at last for the final short journey up into the loft, where the real slow work of drying will finish what her hands have only begun. She stretches, easing the long ache of the day out of her shoulders and her back, and looks over the whole finished row with the same plain, honest satisfaction she felt earlier beneath the old oak, looking over the basket's contents at midday. It is, she thinks, a good deal more than a single basket now. It is a whole small harvest, spread out and sorted and waiting, each tray its own small promise of some particular comfort to be given, some particular season still weeks or months away, some particular someone not yet even known to her who will, one evening deep in the coming winter, be glad, in some small quiet way, that she chose to walk out this morning before the light had properly come up, and gave the whole long day, unhurried and patient, to exactly this kind of careful gathering and careful keeping. Let your own mind settle now into the same slow, careful, orderly rhythm as her sorting hands, each small task laid gently beside the last, nothing rushed, nothing crowded, everything given exactly the space and the care it needs to keep its own quiet virtue through the long months ahead. The table stands ready. The evening is drawing in, soft and amber, and there is only the short climb to the loft still left before the whole long day can finally rest. The stair to the loft is narrow and steep, built into the thickness of the wall itself, worn smooth in the center of each step by years of exactly this same climb, and she carries the trays up two at a time, careful of her footing in the dimness, until the whole sorted harvest of the day has made its slow way up from the table below into the low warm space beneath the thatch, where it will spend the coming days, quietly turning from fresh green gathering into dry, keepable store. She has always loved this room more than almost any other part of her small house, though it is nothing grand to look at, low-ceilinged and close under the sloping roof, lit only by a single small unglazed window at the gable end, and by whatever light finds its way up through the gaps around the stair. What it lacks in size and grandeur, it makes up entirely in what it holds. The whole loft is strung and hung and lined with the accumulated patient work of a full turning year, bunches of dried herbs suspended in neat close rows from the rafters overhead, their stems bound with twists of twine and hung upside down so their remaining strength settles, as she has always been taught, down into the flower and the leaf rather than draining uselessly away toward the cut end of the stem. She sets the newly filled trays out along the low shelf that runs the length of the loft's one long wall, spaced well apart from each other, and from the shelf's edge, where a stray draught from the window will move freely across every leaf and root and flower and begin, gently, the slow work of drawing the last of the day's dew and sap out of them. This is delicate timing, and she has learned it the hard way more than once across the years. A tray set too close to its neighbor drying unevenly, a bundle hung too near the window, catching too much damp night air and beginning, before she noticed, to soften rather than crisp. but the room itself, low and warm and steadily aired through its single small window, has proven itself, season after season, exactly suited to the work. And she moves through it now with the easy familiarity of someone arranging furniture in a room she has lived in her whole life. The rafters above her, as she works, tell almost the whole story of the year already past, if she cared to read it that way. Nearest the stair hang the last of the winter's kept lavender, its color faded now to a soft dusty grey after so many months of hanging, waiting only to be used up entirely before the new season's crop takes its place. Beyond it, a little fresher, hang the bunches from earlier this same spring, the first nettle of the year, the dandelion root strung in small bundles like a row of pale, twisted fingers. The cleavers gathered green, and now gone a deep papery brown. Further along still, closer to the window where the light and the air reach first, hang the more recent gatherings of the past few weeks. The hawthorn blossom already fully cured and crumbling faintly when she brushes a hand beneath it. The first cutting of chamomile from a gathering trip, not so very different from this morning's. She works methodically along the empty stretch of rafter nearest the window, binding fresh twine around small manageable bundles of the day's leafy gatherings, and hanging each one in its turn. The nettle first, then the wood sorrel in its own separate small bunch, then the wild garlic hung a little apart from everything else, exactly as it was kept apart on the drying tray below, so its sharp green scent will not creep over the coming days into the gentler herbs hanging nearby. The elderflower she hangs whole, still on its stem, the wide cream heads turned gently downward, and beside it the meadowsweet, its heavy sweet scent already filling the small room, even before the drying has properly begun, thick and warm and honeyed in a way that seems, to her, almost too generous a gift from so ordinary and unassuming a plant. The valerian root, sliced thin at the table below, she spreads instead across its own dedicated tray rather than hanging it, since root dries better laid flat than suspended, and sets the tray at the far end of the shelf, well apart from the sweeter flowers, its own particular earthy smell already beginning to rise, faint but unmistakable, into the warm still air of the loft. The birch bark curls go onto a second tray beside it, weighted lightly at their edges with small smooth stones kept in a dish on the shelf for exactly this purpose, and the chamomile and yarrow and rose petal and honeysuckle, all gathered loose rather than left on their stems, she spreads across the last of the trays in thin, even layers, ready to be turned gently by hand every day or two, until they have given up the last of their moisture to the patient, unhurried air. By the time she has finished, the whole loft stands thick with a mingled fragrance, unlike almost anything else in the whole of her working world, sweet and green and earthy and floral all at once, elder and meadowsweet and rose and honeysuckle laid over a deeper undernote of drying root and warming bark, the whole rich, complicated smell of an entire early summer day gathered up and hung patiently to keep. She stands for a moment in the middle of the low room, turning slowly, looking up at the long close rows of rafter bunches, some newly hung and still faintly green, some fully cured and pale and papery, some further along, already reduced to the last handful of a jar's worth, waiting to be used up entirely before the year turns round again to their own particular season of renewal. It occurs to her, standing there in the warm, close hush of the loft, with the last low light of evening slanting in through the small gable window, that this room is, in its own quiet, unassuming way, a kind of calendar all its own. A whole turning year laid out in bunches and trays and jars. Spring's nettle giving way along the rafter to early summer's elder, early summer giving way, in its own good time, to midsummer's gold and late summer's berry and autumn's root, the whole slow patient wheel of the seasons made visible, all at once, in a single low room under a single thatched roof. No manuscript she has ever seen, however carefully drawn, and however patiently copied by however skilled a hand, has ever managed to capture the whole of a working year quite the way this small crowded loft captures it, simply by being exactly what it is, the honest accumulated evidence of one woman's patient walking, gathering, cutting, sorting, and keeping, day after day, season after season, for as many years now as she has properly troubled herself to count. She takes a moment, before she leaves the loft for the evening, to run a light hand along the row of bundles nearest the window, the ones hung earliest this same spring, checking each in turn for any stray sign of damp or mold that might have crept in unnoticed, since a single spoiled bundle, left too long without checking, has been known, in a bad year, to spread its rot quietly to its neighbors before anyone thought to look closely enough to catch it. She finds nothing amiss tonight, every bundle crisp and pale and properly cured, and she feels, running her hand along that long familiar row, something very close to the same quiet satisfaction a careful housewife might feel counting a well-stocked larder before the start of a hard winter. The plain solid comfort of knowing that whatever the coming months ask of her, she will not be found wanting for want of care taken earlier, in the easier, warmer months, when the taking of care felt, if anything, more like pleasure than like duty. Down at the far end of the shelf, past the newer trays she has only just set out, sits a row of small clay jars already fully stocked from earlier gatherings this same year, each one stoppered with a twist of waxed cloth and marked, in a plain scratched symbol rather than any written word, since her letters, however hard won, have never quite stretched to fully labeling a whole shelf of jars, with a small private sign that tells her, at a glance, exactly what lies within: a leaf shape for the dried nettle, a small circle for the chamomile, a rough cross hatching for the valerian root. It is a private language, hers alone, built up slowly over years of exactly this same evening sorting. And she has sometimes thought, only half in jest, that if she were ever to write it all down properly in the manner of the physician's borrowed herbal, no one else in the whole parish would be able to read a single page of it, and yet it serves her, and has always served her, better than any borrowed system of letters ever could, because it grew directly out of her own two hands and her own long working memory, rather than out of anyone else's. She checks the window, is set at its proper narrow gap, enough to let the air move freely through without letting in the damp of the coming night, and takes one last long look along the whole hung and laid out length of the loft before she turns, at last, back toward the narrow stair and the ordinary evening still waiting for her below. The day's true work, the outward walking work of basket and knife, is fully finished now. What remains up here in the low warm dark beneath the thatch is patient work of a different kind entirely, the slow quiet work of time itself, air moving gently across leaf and root and flower, drawing the last of the day's freshness gently away and leaving behind, over the coming days, exactly the kind of dry, keepable, long-lasting comfort that will still be giving quiet ease to someone, somewhere, long after this particular warm evening has faded entirely from memory. Let this whole low, fragrant room settle over you now, rafter after rafter of patiently hung bunches, sweet and green and earthy, all mingled together in the warm, close dark. A whole gathered year hanging quietly overhead, keeping its own slow, patient time, exactly as your own tired body might now be keeping its own slow, patient time, settling gently toward rest. By the time she comes back down the narrow stair from the loft, the light through the small kitchen window has turned from amber to a deeper rose, and the first proper coolness of the evening has begun to settle over the house, the kind of coolness that asks, gently but firmly, to have the fire woken again from its daytime banking. She kneels at the hearth and works the coals carefully, feeding in first the thin, dry kindling kept always in a basket beside the hearthstone, and then, once a proper flame has caught, a few of the split logs stacked along the wall, until a small warm fire is burning steady in the grate, throwing a soft orange light across the low room that will, within the hour, be the only light in the whole house, besides the last of the fading window. There is supper to see to now, plain and unhurried, much like everything else in her working day. A pot of pottage has sat simmering low at the back of the hearth since before dawn, thick with barley, and the last of the winter's dried peas, and whatever green things from the garden happen to be ready this particular week. And she stirs it now, tasting, adjusting it with a small pinch of salt and a scatter of fresh herb from the close garden by the door, sage this evening, its soft grey-green leaves rubbed between her fingers before they go into the pot, releasing a warm, slightly resinous scent that mingles in the small close room with the wood smoke and the last lingering trace of elderflower still clinging faintly to her sleeves from the morning. Her niece arrives just as the pottage is nearly ready, letting herself in through the low door with the easy familiarity of someone who has spent half her childhood in this same small kitchen. A basket of her own on her hip, considerably lighter than the one that came home this afternoon, since the girl has spent her own day at rather simpler tasks closer to home. She settles onto the low bench by the fire without being asked, and the two of them fall into the same easy, unhurried talk that has always marked the end of a long day between them. The girl asking after the morning's gathering, turning over the dried bundles already hung in the loft with the same careful, curious fingers she has been developing, cut season by season, under her aunt's patient watching. They eat together at the small scrubbed table by the window, the pottage thick and warm, and entirely sufficient, a heel of the same bread from the morning's basket softened, now by a little butter, and the talk between mouthfuls turns, as it so often does at the end of a long working day, into a kind of gentle recounting, the girl asking to hear again about the fox's hollow in the dawn hedgerow, though she has heard of it a dozen times before, and the gatherer telling it again, unhurried, adding some small fresh detail each time, the down feathers caught in the grass, the faint musky trace on the morning air, because a story told slowly and told again, she has always believed, settles more comfortably into a young mind than any story rushed through only once. She tells her, too, of the midwife's promised bundle safely delivered, and of the small errand still owed to the old man at the far end of the village. The birch bark she means to leave at his door before the week is properly out. And the girl nods along, filing it away the careful way she has learned to file away every small obligation her aunt carries. Since a gatherer's trade, she is slowly coming to understand, is built as much from these small kept promises as from any single morning's careful cutting. There is talk, too, of the coming Midsummer's Eve, still more than a week off, and the small patch of St. John's wort marked and waiting by the mossy gate at the end of the boundary hedge, and the girl asks, as she always asks at this time of year, whether she might be allowed to come along for that particular gathering, since the old teaching about the single proper morning for that one bright flower has always struck her as the most magical part of the whole long turning calendar. And the gatherer promises, as she has promised every year for the past 3, that of course she may come, and watches the girl's whole face brighten at the promise, the way it has brightened every year before. When the meal is finished, and the last of the pottage scraped clean from the pot, the girl helps clear the table before gathering her own basket back onto her hip and taking her leave, the two of them exchanging the same easy, unhurried goodbye they have exchanged at the end of 100 evenings just like this one. No great ceremony in it, only the plain, quiet certainty of two people who expect, without needing to say so, to see each other again very soon. The gatherer stands a moment at the open door, watching the girl's small figure grow smaller down the darkening lane toward her own family's house, the last of the daylight now nearly gone from the sky above the rooftops, the first faint stars beginning to show themselves in a deepening blue that will, within the hour, turn fully to night. She closes the door at last against the cooling evening air and turns back to the small warm room. The fire settled now into a steady low glow, the whole house quiet around her, in the particular settled way a house grows quiet, only at the true end of a long full day. She washes the few dishes by the last of the firelight, sets the pot to soak, and allows herself, finally, the small unhurried luxury of simply sitting a while by the hearth with nothing more pressing to attend to, her feet stretched out toward the warmth, her hands, for once in the whole long day, entirely still. It is at moments exactly like this one, she has often thought, sitting alone by a low fire at the very end of a full working day, that the whole shape of a life like hers becomes most clearly visible to her. Not in any single grand accomplishment, since there has never been one, but in the accumulated weight of 10,000 small mornings, very much like this one, each of them beginning before the light, each of them ending, eventually, exactly here, by exactly this fire, with a basket emptied and a loft a little fuller, and a promise or two kept along the way. She thinks of her own mother, who sat by this same hearth, in this same small house, at the end of just such days, for the whole of her own working life, and further back still. Though the memory grows dimmer and less certain the further back she tries to reach, of women whose faces she never knew and whose names have long since been lost, who nonetheless taught, in their own turn, the very same patient, careful ways she carries now, and will, in her own turn, pass on fully to the niece who has just walked home down the darkening lane. The fire settles lower as the evening deepens around her, the small room filling with the mingled scent of wood smoke and drying herb drifting faintly down from the loft above. Sage and pottage, and the last lingering trace of a whole day's gathering, and she feels, sitting there in the gathering dark with the last of the light gone, entirely now from the small window, the particular deep unhurried tiredness that comes only at the true close of a day spent well, not the sharp exhausted tiredness of work forced or work rushed, but the slow, settled, entirely honest tiredness of a body that has walked far and worked steadily and asked, of itself, nothing more than it was able, comfortably, to give. Let this same slow, settled tiredness begin to move through your own body now, wherever you are resting, the particular deep, unhurried heaviness that comes only at the close of a day given fully and gently to its own quiet purpose. Let the fire in your own mind burn low and steady, the way it burns low and steady in the small hearth beside her, and let the whole long day behind you, hedgerow and wood and marsh and meadow, rest and knife and hedge again, cottage door and homeward path and loft and hearth, settle now, gently, into the deepening dark, exactly as her own long day is settling, hour by quiet hour, toward its close. When the fire has burned down at last to a bed of quiet red coals, she banks it carefully for the night, raking the ash in close around the last of the embers so a gentle warmth will still be waiting for her, banked and patient, when she wakes tomorrow in that same grey hour before the dawn. She takes a single candle up the narrow stair with her, the same stair that carried the day's whole gathered harvest up to the loft only a few hours before, and its small flame throws a slow-moving shadow along the plastered wall as she climbs, the house settling into the particular deep stillness that only comes once every small chore of the day has finally, properly, been finished. She does not go up to the loft again tonight. The drying can look after itself now, patient and slow, the whole hung and laid out harvest of the day breathing quietly in the cool night air that moves gently through the narrow gap left at the gable window, doing, all through the dark hours, exactly the same unhurried work it will go on doing tomorrow and the day after, until every leaf and root and flower has given up the last of its fresh moisture and settled into the long keeping stillness of a proper dried store. She only pauses at the foot of the loft stair for a moment, looking up into the dark toward it, and allows herself the small quiet satisfaction, one last time before sleep, of knowing exactly what rests up there in the patient dark, exactly what comfort it will give, to exactly which household, on some evening not yet arrived. Her own small chamber lies at the other end of the low upper passage, no more than a narrow bed built into the thick wall, a chest for her few good clothes, a single shuttered window that she opens now, just a little, to let the cool night air move through the room the way it moves through the loft, since she has always slept better with a little of the outside world let in beside her than shut entirely away behind close walls. She sets the candle on the small shelf beside the bed, undresses slowly in its soft moving light, the plain wool kirtle and the apron with its deep useful pocket hung carefully over the chest to be worn again tomorrow, the leather guards unwound from her wrists and set aside, the small curved knife still at her belt through all the evening's chores, unbuckled at last and laid, as it is laid every single night of her working life, on the narrow shelf close beside the bed, within easy reach, exactly where her hand will find it again without thought or fumbling the moment tomorrow's grey hour finally comes. She lies down at last, drawing the rough blanket up against the cool of the night, and for a little while, before sleep properly claims her, she lets her mind walk back, slowly and without any hurry at all, over the whole long shape of the day now finished, the way she so often does at exactly this hour, lying still in the dark with the candle blown out and only the faint moving shadow of branches against the shutter for company. She thinks of the grey hour before the dawn, the basket waiting by the door, the small curved knife hanging patient on its peg, the cold, clean air outside the low house before the world had properly woken. She thinks of the hedgerow rising green on either side of the dew-soaked path, the hawthorn gone over to hard little haws, the wide cream plates of elder flower given up so generously by a tree that kept, all the same, more than enough for the bees, and for its own autumn berries besides, the honest sting of the nettle, and further along, hidden and undisturbed, the small quiet hollow where a fox has raised her cubs for longer than she has been walking this same path. She thinks of the worn stile where she sat a while and turned over the old signs, the moon and the hour and the feast days, the borrowed herbal with its careful drawings, the patient hand of some distant, unknown monk who had copied it out, page by page, through a whole cold winter, so that its knowledge might travel far beyond his own narrow window. She thinks of the deep green hush of the wood, the shy wood sorrel folding its small leaves, closed at the first touch of too bright a light, the tall forbidden foxglove standing alone in its shaft of borrowed sun, admired and left entirely untouched, the soft moss lifted gently with the flat of a blade rather than torn, the pale young birch giving up only a little of its bark and asking, in return, nothing more than a quiet resting hand against its trunk. She thinks of the marsh, the careful reading of firm ground from soft, the warm honeyed sweetness of the meadowsweet, rising before she had even properly seen it, the strange dark comforting smell of the valerian root, the tall yellow flag left standing untouched at the very edge of safe walking, the patient grey heron, motionless and watchful, until the one right moment finally came. She thinks of the wide bright meadow, chamomile and yarrow, and the small shy self-heal, so easily overlooked in the tangled grass, the lark rising almost straight up out of the ground ahead of her, singing the whole way, until it was nothing more than a small dark speck against a pale climbing sky. She thinks of the old oak at the meadow's edge, the loose lazy drift of a midday rest that asked nothing of her and gave her, in return, exactly the stillness her body had been quietly asking for since the very first hour of the walking. She thinks of the small curved knife turned over and over in her own hand along the top of a long dry field, her mother's guiding hand remembered across all the years between that first clumsy lesson and this same steady, unthinking skill, the niece she is teaching now in her turn, the whole long unbroken thread of careful, gentle taking running back further than any single memory can properly reach. She thinks of the boundary hedge in its warm slanting afternoon light, the dog rose-spilling pale and open over the dark thorn behind it, the honeysuckle giving up its sweetness only slowly, only to a patient hand, the small marked patch of St. John's wort waiting by the mossy gate for its one proper morning still a week away. She thinks of the midwife's cool doorway, the small cloth-wrapped bundle passed from one steady hand into another, The quiet, unhurried talk of fevers mended, and joints still aching, and a young mother's time drawing near, and how much of the whole long day's careful walking had found its true and final purpose only there, in that small, unremarkable exchange. She thinks of the mill pond and the turning wheel, the standing stones on the low hill, and the whole shape of her day laid out below her in the softening light. Hedgerow and wood and marsh and meadow, one long unbroken circle of green. She thinks of the sorting table beneath the small window, leaf apart from flower, flower apart from root, each small, gathered thing given exactly the space and the care it needed to keep its own quiet virtue through the coming months. She thinks of the low, warm loft under the thatch, rafter after rafter of patiently hung bunches, a whole turning year made visible all at once in a single close room, the deep mingled fragrance of sweetness and earth and warmth that no manuscript, however carefully drawn, could ever quite manage to set down on its own plain page. She thinks of the fire woken again at dusk, the pottage thick and warm, her niece's quick, curious fingers turning over the day's dried bundles, the same old story of the fox's hollow, told once more, slowly, with one small fresh detail added, because a story told again and again, gently, settles far more comfortably into a young mind than any story rushed through only the once. She thinks, too, one last time before sleep finally takes her, of tomorrow, though she does not let the thought press on her with any weight at all, only lets it drift past the way every other thought has drifted past through this long, slow reckoning of the day. Tomorrow will bring its own grey hour, its own basket waiting by the door, its own small, quiet round of gathering, not identical to today's, since no 2 days along this same path are ever quite identical, but built from the very same patient rhythm, the very same careful hand, the very same willingness to walk out before the light and trust that the wood and the marsh and the meadow will, as they have always done, give generously to whoever comes to them with an open eye and a gentle hand. There is nothing in that thought that asks for worry. It is simply the next turn of a wheel that has been turning steadily for longer than she has been alive, and will go on turning, she trusts, long after she herself has finally set down the basket and the knife for good, into hands not yet born, walking paths not yet walked, gathering gifts the wood has not yet even offered. All of it settles now, gently, into the deepening quiet of the small dark room, the whole long day folding closed the way a well-tended flower folds closed at the end of its own bright hour, nothing lost, nothing wasted, only gathered in, carefully, and kept. If you have walked this whole long day beside her, hour by quiet hour, from the grey light before the dawn to this same settling dark, let your own body now do exactly what hers is doing, sinking a little further into whatever soft warmth is holding you, the breath slowing, the shoulders loosening, the whole weight of a long day finally, fully set down. There is nothing left tonight that asks anything more of you. The basket is empty and resting by the door. The knife is laid on its shelf within easy reach, needed by no one until a new day chooses, in its own good time, to begin. The loft breathes quietly in the cool night air, and the fire glows low and banked and patient in the dark room below, and there is nothing at all left to do now, nothing at all left to gather, nothing at all left to carry, except yourself gently down into sleep. Let your breath come slow now and easy, in and softly out, in and softly out. the same unhurried rhythm as a long-walked path, the same patient rhythm as a root easing loose from dark, damp soil, the same quiet rhythm as a fire settling low in its own good time. Let your eyes, if they have not already, close now fully, and let the small remaining weight of the day, whatever day it has been for you, slip loose from your shoulders the way a basket slips loose from a tired arm at the very end of a long walk home. There is nowhere you need to be. There is nothing you need to hold. There is only this soft dark, and this slow breath, and this long, gentle, patient sinking down and down and down into the deep, warm quiet of sleep. Somewhere in this same soft dark, a gatherer sleeps too, her basket empty by the door, her knife resting on its narrow shelf, a whole loft of quietly drying comfort breathing gently above her through the cooling night. And tomorrow, in the grey hour before the light, she will rise again unhurried, and walk the same round again, hedgerow and wood and marsh and meadow, gathering, patiently, whatever the new day chooses to give her. But that is a story for another night, and there is no need to think of it now. Tonight there is only rest, deep and unclaimed and entirely your own, waiting for you exactly as it is waiting now for her. Sleep well. The quiet apothecary will be here again soon, with another slow, quiet corner of the old world to walk through together. For now, let this whole long green day rest gently behind your closing eyes. Hedgerow fading into wood, wood fading into marsh, marsh fading into meadow, meadow fading softly into hearth light, and hearth light fading at last into the deep, warm, patient dark. Rest now. Let the basket rest, and the knife rest, and the whole tired body rest, heavy and warm and utterly at ease. Rest deep, and let the long quiet night carry you gently all the way down into your sleep.